Hey everyone! Welcome back to Watch Harry Get Ready for an Amazing Tale. Petunia found Lily's binding contract and Dumbledore lost 19 ancient guardianship rights over Harry. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Grimoire in the encyclopedia. The cake was Dudley's idea, which meant it had 3 layers, buttercream frosting in Dudley's favorite shade of violent yellow, and a plastic dinosaur on top that Dudley had already tried to claim back twice before it was even lit. The whole kitchen smelled of sugar and Vernon's aftershave, and Harry sat at the far end of the table with a glass of water and the particular kind of stillness that comes from years of practicing how to take up as little space as possible. Nobody had said happy birthday to him. That wasn't a surprise. Birthdays at Privet Drive were Dudley's domain, Dudley's balloons, Dudley's presents stacked in precarious towers in the front room, Dudley's friends arriving at 2 in the afternoon to eat Dudley's cake and watch Dudley open things. Harry's birthday happened to fall on the same day, which was, as Vernon had explained when Harry was 4, an unfortunate coincidence and not an invitation. Harry was 7 today. He knew this because he'd counted, carefully, on the small square of calendar he'd torn from a magazine at school and kept folded inside his left shoe. July 31st. He'd circled it in pencil so faint you'd have to know it was there to see it. He watched Dudley try to blow out all 7 candles in one go and fail, spattering the top layer of cake with a fine mist, and thought about what it would feel like to have 7 candles lit for you. He thought about it the way he thought about a lot of things, quietly, without letting it show on his face, because showing things on your face at Privet Drive was the fastest way to have them taken from you. Go on then, Petunia said, appearing at Harry's elbow with a plate. Not cake, a thin slice, the corner piece with less frosting than the rest, but still. A plate. Harry looked up at her, surprised enough that he forgot to hide it. She wasn't looking at him. She was already turning back to the counter, already arranging candles in a row on a folded piece of kitchen roll, and the moment passed before Harry could decide what to do with it. He ate the cake. It was very good. He didn't say so. By 3 o'clock, Dudley's friends had descended into the kind of sugar-fueled chaos that made Vernon go red at the ears and Petunia press her lips together in the way that meant she was counting silently to 10. By 4, 2 of them had knocked a lamp off the side table and the other one had tracked muddy footprints across the hallway carpet, and Petunia had sent Harry upstairs, not unkindly, just practically, the way you'd move a vase out of the way before children started running, to stay out from underfoot. Harry didn't mind. His room, Dudley's second bedroom, technically, the one that still had Dudley's old racecar wallpaper and a broken toy chest in the corner, was quiet. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the narrow strip of back garden, at the rosebushes Petunia kept obsessively trimmed and the lawn that Vernon mowed in ruler straight lines every Saturday without fail. A normal garden. A normal street. Everything in the world arranged into neat little boxes labeled normal in large, reassuring letters. He pressed his palm flat against the windowsill and thought, very deliberately, lift. The loose nail in the corner of the sill rose 3 inches and hung in the air, spinning slowly. Harry looked at it. The nail looked back. He'd been able to do things like this for as long as he could remember, small things, quiet things, things that happened when nobody was watching. Once, when he was 5 and Dudley's friends had backed him into a corner of the playground, he'd ended up on the roof of the school building without remembering climbing there. Once, when he was 6 and Vernon had taken his blanket in October because of something to do with electricity bills, the blanket had been back on his bed by morning, warm, as if it had never left. He didn't think about it too hard. Thinking about it too hard felt dangerous, the way standing on the edge of something tall felt dangerous, not because you wanted to fall, but because part of you was curious about what falling would feel like. The nail drifted back down and settled into its groove. Harry heard the front door slam downstairs, Dudley's friends leaving, by the sound of it, and then Dudley's voice raised in protest about something, and then Vernon's voice raised in response, and then the particular domestic thunder that meant the Dursley household was settling back into its normal rhythms. He lay back on the bed and closed his eyes, and tried to decide if he felt any different at 7 than he had at 6. He didn't, particularly. A little hungrier, maybe. A little more aware of the shape of things. Downstairs, Petunia was cleaning. This was not unusual. Petunia cleaned the way other people breathed, constantly, automatically, with the focus of someone who believed that if she stopped, everything would fall apart. After parties she was particularly thorough, moving through the rooms with a bin bag and a cloth, reassembling order from chaos with the quiet intensity of a general after a battle. She'd already done the kitchen and the front room. She was working on the hallway now, on her knees with a cloth and a spray bottle, getting the muddy footprints out of the carpet before they set, when she noticed the door to the cupboard under the stairs was slightly ajar. Harry's cupboard. Well, it wasn't his anymore, hadn't been for 2 months, not since the school rang about the state of it and Petunia had moved him upstairs before anyone official could come looking. But she still thought of it as his. Old habit. She pushed the door open further and looked inside. It was mostly empty now, just the old broken vacuum cleaner they couldn't be bothered to throw out, a box of Vernon's old golf magazines, and a stack of Dudley's outgrown books that Petunia had been meaning to donate to the charity shop for months. She'd been putting it off because sorting through Dudley's old things always made her feel inexplicably sad in a way she couldn't articulate, and Petunia had very little patience for feelings she couldn't articulate. She started pulling things out. The golf magazines went straight into the bin bag. The vacuum cleaner she dragged into the hallway to deal with later. The books she stacked in the crook of her arm, Richard Scarry, a set of encyclopedias that Vernon's mother had bought before she died, some early readers with cracked spines, and carried them through to the kitchen table to sort properly. She was going through the encyclopedias when she found it. Volume MN felt wrong. Too heavy, slightly, for its size, and when she set it down on the table the cover didn't quite sit flush the way the others did. She opened it. Someone had hollowed it out. Carefully, precisely, not hacked, but cut, with something very sharp, leaving clean edges and a cavity the exact size of the book nestled inside it. The book was small. Dark green cover, no title on the spine, held shut with a clasp that looked like braided copper wire looped twice around a central bar. The cover was smooth under her fingers, almost warm. Petunia had absolutely no reason to think it was anything other than something Lily had left. She knew it was Lily's the way she knew the smell of Lily's shampoo, from somewhere too deep to be logical, from the part of her brain that predated reason. Her sister's handwriting was on the inside cover, she knew it before she even opened it, and her hands were completely steady when she undid the clasp. Fortuny, if you're reading this, then I was right to worry. I'm sorry. Read everything. Petunia sat down. She hadn't sat down unexpectedly in years. Sitting down unexpectedly meant something had gotten past your guard, and Petunia Dursley did not let things get past her guard. But she sat down now, on one of the kitchen chairs, very slowly, with Lily's book open in her hands, and she read the inscription 3 times. If you're reading this, then I was right to worry. The kitchen was very quiet. From upstairs she could hear Dudley's television. From the front room she could hear Vernon's newspaper rustling. Outside, a car moved slowly down Privet Drive and someone's sprinkler started up with its patient, rhythmic hiss. She turned the page. The clasp had barely cleared the latch when Petunia felt it, a pressure against her fingertips, not painful, more like pressing your hand against a window on a cold day, that sudden awareness of something on the other side. The pages were ordinary at first glance. Lily's handwriting, dense and slanted, the way it always was when she was excited about something. Sketches in the margins, diagrams, she thought, though of what she couldn't immediately tell. And then the paper changed. Not dramatically. Not with a flash or a bang or any of the theatrical nonsense Lily had occasionally produced when they were children and she was showing off in the garden. One moment the pages were paper, and the next they had weight, the kind of weight that had nothing to do with the physical, the kind you feel in your chest when something important is happening and your body knows it before your mind catches up. A line appeared at the bottom of the first page. Dark red ink, freshly written, though the book was clearly years old. Contract of Blood and Choosing, Article 1 of 19 has been recognized. The Guardian has touched the seal. Binding commences upon completion of the first reading. Then, below that, in different ink, older, faded to rust, if the Guardian does not complete the reading before sunrise, all 19 articles lapse and the contract becomes void. You have until dawn. Petunia looked at the kitchen clock. 4:30 in the afternoon. She turned to Article 1 and began to read. Upstairs, Harry felt it. He was lying on his bed, not quite asleep, watching the late afternoon light move across Dudley's old racecar wallpaper, when something happened inside his chest. Not pain. Nothing like pain. It was more like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. Or the way the air in a room changes when someone opens a window in summer, that sudden rush of something larger and realer than what was inside. He sat up. His hands were glowing, faintly, a warm gold-tinged light that pulsed twice and faded. He stared at them for a long moment. They'd done odd things before, the nail, the blanket, countless small impossibilities, but they'd never glowed. He felt, very specifically, as if something had been watching him from a very far away place had suddenly shifted its attention. Not threatening. Not anything close to threatening. More like, being noticed. Being included, after a long time of being kept outside something. He curled his fingers slowly and the glow didn't return, but the feeling didn't entirely leave either. It settled somewhere in his sternum like an ember, steady and warm. He went back to watching the wallpaper, but he wasn't not quite asleep anymore. He was very much awake. Petunia read until the light failed and she had to turn the kitchen light on. She read through Vernon calling through that dinner was getting cold and her saying she'd be a minute. She read through Dudley thundering down to ask if there was pudding and her pointing at the leftover cake without looking up. She read through Vernon appearing in the doorway and saying her name 3 times before she answered. "What is that?" Vernon said, looking at the book the way he looked at most things he didn't understand, with a wariness that wanted very badly to be contempt but didn't quite make it. "Lilies." A pause. Vernon hated when she talked about Lily. He'd worked very hard to help Petunia stop talking about Lily, and largely succeeded, and her voice was very flat when she said it now, not soft, not sad, just flat, the way you'd say Tuesday or lamppost. "You should throw it out," Vernon said. "Go away, Vernon." Another pause, longer. Then the sound of him retreating to the front room. Petunia turned the page and kept reading. Article 7 was the one that made her put the book down and press both hands flat against the table, knuckles white. It was about a suppression seal. Dumbledore's work, Lily had written, though she'd phrased it more carefully than that, because Lily, even when she was furious with someone, tended to be precise. A dormancy restriction, applied to Harry's core without consent, for the stated purpose of preventing accidental magic from drawing attention. The restriction does not expire. It is maintained by proximity to the wards on the property at No. 4, Privet Drive, and renewed annually on the summer solstice. In effect, my son has been growing up with his magic caged. Not carefully limited. Caged. He cannot feel the full extent of what he is capable of. He cannot grow into his power naturally. He is, magically speaking, being kept deliberately small. Petunia thought about Harry at 5, sitting very quietly while Dudley's friends laughed at him, and not doing anything about it. She thought about Harry at 6 with no blanket in October. She thought about the fact that she had occasionally noticed things, small things, easy to explain away, and had explained them away, because explaining them away was easier than looking at them. What did you do to him? She thought, and it wasn't clear, even to her, whether she was thinking it at Dumbledore or at herself. She turned to Article 8. Harry woke at some point in the middle of the night, though he hadn't remembered falling asleep. The house was quiet. Privet Drive was quiet. The particular dense quiet of 2 in the morning, when even the most restless street gives up and goes dark. He lay still for a moment and listened to the shape of the silence and realized what had woken him. It was too quiet. The low-level hum that he'd been aware of his entire life without ever quite consciously registering it, the thing under the walls, under the floorboards, a dull constant pressure like something pushing gently against the inside of your skull, was gone. He sat up slowly. His hands weren't glowing. The ember in his chest was still there, though, steadier than it had been. He got up and went to the door and opened it and stood at the top of the stairs, listening. The kitchen light was on. He went down, very quietly, socked feet on the carpet, one hand on the wall. Petunia was at the kitchen table. She had a cup of tea at her elbow, gone cold, and Lily's book open in front of her, and she was on what looked like the last few pages. Her shoulders were very straight. Her face was doing something Harry had never seen it do before, not the thin-lipped expression she wore when something displeased her, not the careful blankness she kept for when she wanted to pretend something wasn't happening. Something open. Something that looked, very much, like grief. He must have made a sound, or maybe she just felt him there, because she looked up. For a moment they just looked at each other across the kitchen, the woman who had spent 7 years pretending he was an inconvenience she was obligated to tolerate, and the boy who had spent 7 years believing her. "Sit down, Harry," Petunia said. He sat. She looked at him for another long moment. In the kitchen light he could see things about her face he didn't usually notice, the shadows under her eyes that were always there, the fine lines at the corners. She looked older than she usually looked, but not in a bad way. More like, real. "Do you know what you are?" she said. Harry blinked. "What?" "Not who." "What?" She pressed her fingertips lightly against the open book. "Have they explained it to you?" "Anyone?" "A teacher, someone on the street?" "Anyone?" "No," Harry said, because it was true, and because something in the way she was asking meant she already knew the answer and was asking anyway, to confirm something. Petunia nodded, once, slowly. "Your mother was a witch," she said. "A genuinely extraordinary one. Not ordinary. Not just, someone who could do things most people can't. Extraordinary. I knew it when she was 9 years old and she made a butterfly out of fallen leaves just because she thought they should be more interesting." A pause. "She was the most remarkable person I have ever known and I spent most of our adult lives being small about it. I want you to know that. So you understand what I'm telling you isn't me being generous. It's just the truth." Harry said nothing. He wasn't sure he could say anything. He was fairly certain that if he moved or spoke the moment would collapse and become something ordinary again, and he wasn't ready for it to do that. "Your father was also a wizard. Also apparently quite gifted, though your mother's notes on the subject are somewhat editorialized." The ghost of something crossed Petunia's face, not quite a smile. "You are, according to this book, which is the most complicated and extraordinary thing Lily ever made, also a wizard. And not a small one." She looked at him steadily. "You've known you can do things. Haven't you?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," Harry said. "Have you been afraid of it?" He thought about this honestly. "No," he said. "Not really. Not the way I'm afraid of other things." He paused. "It feels like mine." Something in Petunia's face settled, resolved, like a question being answered. "Good," she said quietly. "That's, yes. Good." She turned the book around so he could see the page it was open to and slid it across the table toward him. Harry looked down at his mother's handwriting. "If Harry is reading this alongside you, hello, my love. You are 7 years old and I have been gone long enough that you don't remember me properly, and I'm sorry for that in a way that doesn't have words. But you need to hear this. You are not small. You have never been small. Someone made you feel small because they thought it was safe and necessary, and they were wrong on both counts. What you are is enormous and good and entirely your own. Don't let anyone keep you caged again. I love you past the end of everything. Mum. Harry read it twice. His hands were completely still on the table. The ember in his chest burned steady and warm and very certain. She wrote that for me, he said. She wrote the whole book for both of us, Petunia said. She knew. She knew what Dumbledore would do, and she knew I'd be too. She knew I might not look. She was hoping the right circumstance would put it in front of me. Who's Dumbledore? An extremely powerful man who has been making decisions about your life since before you were born without asking you or anyone who loves you. Petunia's voice was very even, but her fingers, where they rested on the table, were pressed down hard enough to whiten the tips. He put you here. He decided you'd live here, with us, without asking me, without telling me what I was agreeing to, without explaining what your being here meant or what protections existed or what rights I had, or didn't have, over your care. He simply placed you on a doorstep. Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about it very specifically, the low ceiling and the particular damp smell and the way sound carried strangely, and then he put it away again, because it was the past and the present was his mother's handwriting and the very strange expression on Petunia's face. The contract in the book, he said. What does it do? Petunia sat back slightly. It makes me your legal magical guardian. Not just in the muggle sense. In the magical world's legal sense, with all the protections and rights that entails. Your mother drew it up before she died, binding it to the possibility that I would find it and choose to accept it. The moment I touched the clasp, she paused. Apparently that counted as acceptance. The contract activated. Another pause. It has 19 articles. What are the articles? 19 things Dumbledore took from you, Petunia said. Or took from me, which amounts to the same thing. 19 rights, to information about your own life, your own history, your own finances. The right to control your magical education. The right to control where you live and under what conditions. The right to, she stopped. Drew a breath. He placed a suppression on your magic. When I accepted the contract, it broke. Article 7. She looked at him. Did you feel it? Earlier. Late afternoon. Yes, Harry said. Like a door opening. That's what it was. Petunia picked up her cold cup of tea and then set it back down. By accepting the contract I reclaim several of the rights automatically. They return to me because I'm legally your guardian now and they can't be held elsewhere. But 8 of them require formal action. I have to go somewhere and file a challenge, according to Lily's notes. Somewhere called Gringotts. The Wizarding Bank, Harry said, with the confidence of someone who doesn't know how he knows a thing but knows it anyway. Petunia blinked. You know about it. I know a lot of things I don't know how I know, Harry said. I think the seal, the suppression, was covering more than just my magic. I think it was keeping other things quiet too. He pressed a hand to his chest. It's louder in here now. Busier. Like someone turned a volume up. Petunia looked at him for a long moment and then did something Harry had never seen her do in 7 years. She reached across the table and put her hand briefly, awkwardly, over his. Just for a second. A quick, practical touch, and then she withdrew it and straightened her spine. I want to be clear with you, she said, in her normal voice, precise, slightly clipped, with all its familiar edges. I am not a warm person. I am not going to become a warm person. I am not your mother and I won't pretend to be and I don't think you'd want me to. No, Harry agreed. But I am going to do this correctly. Everything that's been done wrong is going to be corrected. And anyone who tries to put things back the way they were will find that I am extremely difficult to argue with. She said it the way she might say I'm going to repaint the hallway or I intend to complain to the council about those hedges, matter of fact, certain, with the quiet confidence of someone who has never in their life failed to do something they decided to do. Harry felt, for the first time in his life, something that it took him a moment to identify. He sat with it, turned it over, examined it carefully. It was, he realized, the feeling of being on the same side as the most competent person in the room. It was a very good feeling. "What happens to the rights I've already got back?" he asked. "They're mine. Legally. As of tonight." Petunia touched the book. "The article about the suppression seal, that's already resolved, because the seal broke the moment the contract activated. The others that activate automatically," she glanced at a page she'd marked with the folded corner. "The right to information about your parents' deaths. The right to access to your parents' properties and possessions. The right to," she paused on one, and her voice went briefly flat in a way that meant she was controlling it. "The right to appropriate living conditions. The cupboard." They both knew it. "I moved you upstairs 2 months ago," she said. "Before I found this." "I know," Harry said. "A beat." "I know it doesn't fix what the first 7 years were," Petunia said. Not apologetically, more like stating a fact, making sure it was on record. "But I want you to know that I noticed. Before I found the contract. I noticed, and I changed it, even when I didn't understand why it needed changing. I want that to be clear." "It's clear," Harry said. Outside, the first gray suggestion of pre-dawn was beginning at the edges of the sky. The kitchen light felt too bright for a moment, and then settled. "The contract says I have until sunrise to complete the first reading," Petunia said. "I have 3 articles left." She turned the book back toward herself and picked up where she'd left off. "Go back to bed, Harry." He stood up. At the doorway he paused, not quite knowing why, and turned back. Petunia was already reading, her back very straight, her finger tracing a line of Lily's writing with a focus so intent it looked like concentration but felt, from the doorway, like something more tender than that. "She was right," Harry said, "about you. She was right to hope you'd find it." Petunia didn't look up. Her finger kept moving along the line of text. But something shifted in her shoulders, the barest fraction, and she said, quietly, "Go to bed, Harry." He went. Dawn came at 20 to 6. The contract, by that point, had been read from cover to cover, every article, every subclause, every piece of Lily's meticulous, furious, loving preparation. Petunia closed it as the first real light came through the kitchen window and sat for a moment in the silence. The clasp sealed itself shut. The copper wire looped back into place with a sound like a very distant bell. On the front page, where it had said Article 1 of 19 has been recognized, it now said, "All 19 articles accepted. Contract binding commences. The guardian knows her rights. The guardian knows her child. Let those who assumed authority without asking show cause or stand aside." And then, in Lily's handwriting, which shouldn't have been able to appear in a book written years ago, fresh ink on old paper, "Thank you, Toonie. I always knew you'd come through." Petunia sat very still for a long time. Then she got up, tipped the cold tea down the drain, put the kettle on, and started making a list. When Vernon came downstairs at 7, he found his wife at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of tea, a legal-looking notepad covered in her precise, architectural handwriting, and a small dark green book set to one side with the careful deliberateness of something important. "What's all this?" he asked. "Necessary arrangements," Petunia said, without looking up. "For what?" She looked up then, and something in her face made Vernon stop and recalibrate, the way a large animal stops when it senses the weather changing. Petunia Dursley had been the same woman for all the years he'd known her, contained, controlled, organized, occasionally sharp but reliably his, in the unspoken way of long marriages. The woman at the kitchen table was all of those things but arranged differently, like the same furniture in a different room. "Everything is going to change, Vernon," she said, pleasantly. "I'm going to explain it all to you tonight, after Harry and I are back." "Back from where?" We're going out today. She turned back to the notepad. Harry and I need you to take Dudley to your mother's. Vernon's mouth opened. Closed. Petunia, tonight, she said again. I'll explain everything tonight. Take Dudley to your mother's. Vernon Dursley had married a woman who knew her own mind and had spent 20 years finding this variously attractive and inconvenient. He looked at her for another moment, then turned and left the kitchen. Upstairs, Harry was awake. He'd been awake since before dawn, lying in his bed, listening to the house settle around him and feeling the steady warmth of the ember in his chest, brighter now than it had been yesterday, brighter than it had ever been. He stretched both hands out in front of him in the early morning light and thought, very deliberately, up. Every small object in the room, the loose nail, the 3 pencils on the desk, a button that had been sitting in the corner for months, rose smoothly into the air and hung there, turning gently, orbiting each other in the morning light. Harry looked at them. Felt the threads of his attention holding them there, easy as breathing. Felt how far it could extend, if he let it, further than the room, further than the house, wider and deeper and more completely his than anything had ever been. He let them down gently and sat up. Somewhere downstairs, he heard his aunt's kettle click off. He heard the sound of purposeful movement, of someone organizing. Of someone who had decided something and was beginning. He got up, found the cleanest clothes he had, and went to meet her. Chapter 2, What Lily Wrote. Petunia made toast. This was, Harry understood, a significant act. Not because toast was significant, but because Petunia made it the way she did everything, precisely, with full attention, for slices at exactly the right shade of brown, cut on the diagonal, butter applied while the bread was still hot enough to melt it through properly. She set a plate in front of Harry and one at her own place and sat down and poured tea for both of them without asking if he wanted any, and Harry picked up his toast and ate it and didn't say anything about the fact that this was the first time in 7 years he'd sat at this table and had a meal made specifically for him. The list on the notepad had grown overnight. It covered both sides of 3 pages now, Petunia's handwriting small and even and utterly without wasted space. I need to explain several things to you, Petunia said, wrapping both hands around her mug, before we go anywhere. Some of it will be difficult to hear. All right, Harry said. She looked at him as if checking whether he meant it. He did, which she apparently concluded, because she nodded and began. Your parents didn't just die, she said. They were murdered. I knew this, your mother and I weren't completely estranged, whatever it may have seemed like. We wrote letters. Not often, not warmly, but we wrote. I knew there was a war in their world. I knew she was frightened. She paused. I didn't know how frightened. Not until last night. Who killed them? Harry asked. A man named Voldemort. She said it without flinching, which Harry noted. Your mother's notes are thorough. He killed your father first, then came for her, and she refused to step aside. That's how Lily's notes describe it. She refused. And that act of deliberate, chosen love, created a protection so powerful it destroyed him when he turned his wand on you. Harry was quiet for a moment. Destroyed. Not killed. Petunia's eyes sharpened. Your mother used the same distinction. No, not killed. He lost his body. His power. He's latent, somewhere, barely alive, according to everything Lily had gathered in those last months before she died. A pause. She was very thorough. She'd been researching him for 2 years. She wrote everything down. She was preparing. She was terrified and brilliant, and she prepared for every contingency she could think of, yes. Petunia set her mug down. Including Dumbledore. Harry reached for another piece of toast. Tell me about him. Albus Dumbledore, Petunia said, and her voice was careful now, not afraid, just careful, the way you'd be careful describing something that had very sharp edges. He is, by all accounts, the most powerful wizard alive. He runs a school called Hogwarts where magical children go to learn. He leads a faction in the wizarding world. He led the resistance against Voldemort. He is, by all accounts, considered good and wise and trustworthy. She turned her teacup 90 degrees on the saucer. He placed you on our doorstep on the 1st of November, 1981, in the middle of the night, with a letter. What did the letter say? I don't have it. I threw it away. A beat. I was 25 years old and my sister had just been murdered and I'd been told by the most powerful wizard alive that the safest thing I could do was take her child and ask no questions. Her voice didn't change. I was frightened and grieving and I did what I was told. I've spent 7 years doing what I was told. She said this the way someone says something they've been running over in their mind all night, not with drama, just with the flat, final quality of a decision being laid on a table. Done, now. Acknowledged. Moving on. The contract, Harry said. The 19 articles. Can you go through them with me? Petunia pulled the notepad toward her. I've organized them. Some are already resolved, they activated when I accepted the contract. Others require action. She tilted the pad so he could see the neat 2 columns she'd made. Resolved and requires action. Shall I start with the resolved ones? Yes. She ran her finger down the left column. Article 1, the right to knowledge of the contract's existence. Resolved, that's the contract itself activating. Article 2, the right to be informed of your parents' identities and history. Resolved, I am now your legal magical guardian and I'm telling you. Article 3, the right to appropriate living conditions. She paused. Also resolved, technically, because I moved you upstairs before the contract activated. The magic accepted that as sufficient. Lucky, Harry said. Petunia's mouth pressed together slightly. Yes. Article 4, the right to access your family's financial accounts. Not yet resolved, that requires Gringotts. Article 5, the right to receive correspondence directed to you. That one, she stopped. Harry looked at her. What? She turned the notepad around. She'd written Article 5 at the top of a separate page, and beneath it she'd copied out the relevant passage from Lily's grimoire. Harry read it. Dumbledore placed a redirect ward on all correspondence addressed to Harry Potter at any address, effective from the date of placement at number 4. All letters, communications, and magical post addressed to Harry have been redirected to Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts. Harry has received none of it. This includes birthday correspondence from magical contacts of his parents. Memorial notices from the Ministry of Magic sent annually. Informational letters from Gringotts regarding his accounts and trust. And, most significantly, a letter written by me, to be delivered on Harry's 7th birthday, via my solicitor. Lily Evans Potter, October 1981. Harry read it twice. He put the toast down. There's a letter, he said. From your mother. Written in October of 1981, a week before she died, and entrusted to a magical solicitor with instructions to deliver it on your 7th birthday. Petunia's voice was very even. You didn't receive it because it was redirected. The ember in Harry's chest had shifted. Still warm, still steady, but with something else underneath it now, something that wasn't anger, exactly, but was its immediate neighbor. He sat with it for a moment and let it be what it was. We get the letter back, he said. It wasn't a question. We get everything back, Petunia said. He looked at her. She looked at him. There was a moment between them, not warm, not sentimental, but solid, the way a handshake is solid, the way an agreement is solid when both parties mean it fully. Continue, he said. She turned back to the list. Article 6 was about guardianship itself, the formal legal right to make decisions about Harry's magical welfare, which Dumbledore had assumed by default and never relinquished. Article 7 was the suppression seal, already broken. Article 8 was the right to know about the prophecy, and here Petunia paused again, and this pause was longer. Prophecy, Harry said. There is one. About you. Petunia turned to the relevant page in the notebook. Your mother didn't know the full text, she'd only been told fragments, by people she trusted more than Dumbledore. But the substance of it is, that there is someone born at the end of July in a certain year, to parents who defied Voldemort, who has the power to defeat him. Me. Apparently. And Dumbledore knew. Dumbledore has known since before you were born. He was present when the prophecy was made. He is the reason Voldemort knew about it, because someone overheard it and carried the news, and Dumbledore. Petunia read from the notepad again, choosing Lily's words. Made choices about security and disclosure that prioritized the war effort over the safety of the family named in the prophecy. She looked up. Your mother was considerably more restrained in her phrasing than I would have been. Harry thought about this. He thought about it the way he'd thought about the nail last night, turning it over, examining it, putting it in its right place. He was 7 years old and someone had written a prophecy about him before he was born, and the most powerful wizard in the world had been managing his life around it ever since, and nobody had asked him or told him anything. It doesn't scare me, he said, and meant it. The prophecy. It doesn't scare me. Petunia looked at him steadily. Good, she said, in the same tone she'd used last night. Because I intend for it to become entirely irrelevant to your day-to-day life. You are a child who is going to go to school and learn things and grow up. What happens after that, she moved her hand slightly, a small decisive gesture, is for you to decide when you're old enough to decide it. Not Dumbledore. Not a prophecy. You. Harry picked the toast back up. What are Articles 9 through 19? She turned the page. 9 through 14 are financial. Your parents left a considerable amount, accounts at Gringotts, properties, objects in a family vault. Dumbledore held the account keys through a proxy and has been, according to Lily's notes, drawing quarterly maintenance fees as a nominated Wizarding Guardian, a title he gave himself by filing a form at the Ministry, incidentally, in a move your mother described as technically legal and morally bankrupt. He's been taking money from my vault? Maintenance fees. Small amounts. But yes. Petunia's expression was the one she got when the council failed to fill in a pothole she'd formally complained about, a very controlled, very complete displeasure. The rights relating to your properties, Godric's Hollow and 2 others, are also held in a kind of suspension. Nothing can be done with them without a guardian's authorization, and since Dumbledore was the only one with that authority, they've sat and used. There are 3 properties. There are 3 properties. Harry sat back slightly and looked at the ceiling. Not in despair, in something closer to wonder. He was 7 years old and homeless in every way that mattered, and he had 3 properties he'd never been told about. 15, Petunia continued, is the right to information about the magical world and your place in it, which again, Dumbledore held, meaning he controlled when and how you were introduced to everything. He intended, according to your mother's notes, to introduce you himself at age 11. On his schedule. In his way. A pause. 16 is the right to unrestricted expression of your magic. The suppression seal covered this, it's broken now, but the right has to be formally restored so no one can reapply it without your consent. No one is ever reapplying it, Harry said. Correct. Petunia moved on. 17 is the right to your parents' personal effects. There are items specifically set aside for you, your father's personal objects, letters your mother wrote over the years, things from their house. All held in trust by Dumbledore's proxy and inaccessible without his authorization. My parents' things, Harry said quietly. Your parents' things, Petunia confirmed, and she said it softly enough that it registered, even though her voice was the same. 18, he asked. Petunia looked at the page. Read it. Then she said, carefully, Article 18 is the right to know that you are not alone. Your mother listed, by name, the people who survived the war and who love you and who have been, effectively, kept from you. Who didn't know where you were, or were told you were safe and well cared for and couldn't inquire further. She turned the notepad toward him. He looked at the name at the top of the list. Sirius Black, Godfather, legally named in the Potter family records as first guardian. Status unknown. I have a godfather, Harry said. You do. Status unknown. Petunia was quiet for a moment. Your mother didn't know what happened to him. She wrote this contract in the last weeks of her life, when she knew she was running out of time, and at that point Sirius Black was still alive and free and would have come for you the moment anything happened. She paused. He didn't. Which means something happened to him between her death and your placement with us. Your mother's contract names him as the intended guardian if I decline, which means if I'd declined the contract, if I'd read it and turned the page and refused, the binding would have passed to him instead. Harry looked at the name for a long time. She built him in, he said. As a backup. She thought of everything, Petunia said, with a complicated quality in her voice that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite grief. She always did. What's Article 19? Petunia turned to the last page. Read it. When she looked up, something in her expression had shifted, still controlled, but underneath it, something almost fierce. Article 19, she said, is the right to determine your own future. Your own choices about education, about alliances, about how and when and whether you engage with the prophecy. Dumbledore held this right through a combination of the guardianship proxy, the dormancy seal, and, according to Lily, a mild compulsion ward on the property that made the people living here less likely to question his authority or seek outside information. She let that sit for a moment. It broke when Article 7 broke. The compulsion ward dissolved. Harry thought about Vernon, who had never in 7 years asked a single question about anything to do with Harry's situation. Vernon, who had gone along with the cupboard and the hand-me-down clothes and the half-portions at dinner without ever seeming to think critically about any of it. Vernon, who was not a kind man but who was, Harry had always privately thought, not quite cruel enough for the extent of his indifference. That's why, he said softly. Petunia nodded, once. I think so. Yes. Are you? He stopped. Are you angry? She picked up her tea. Took a sip. I'm furious, she said, in her normal voice. But I'm going to be useful about it. Harry almost smiled. Okay. Finish your toast, Petunia said. We're going to London. Getting Vernon sorted took 40 minutes, which Petunia clearly considered 25 minutes too long. Harry sat on the stairs and listened to the low urgent sound of their voices through the kitchen door, punctuated by Vernon's periodic attempts at volume and Petunia's complete refusal to raise hers above conversational. Vernon sounded alarmed, then blustering, then confused, then, finally, quiet. Dudley appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas and looked down at Harry. Where are you going? Dudley said. London, Harry said. Dudley considered this. He was, Harry knew, not entirely stupid, just rarely required to think about anything beyond the immediate, because everything he needed was always provided before he had to ask. He had his father's wide face and his mother's eyes, and right now those eyes were doing something Harry had never particularly seen them do, which was noticing. Mum's different, Dudley said. Yeah, Harry agreed. Is it because of the book? Harry looked up at him. You saw it? I wasn't snooping, Dudley said, defensive and then immediately less defensive. I came down for water at like 3 in the morning and she was reading it and she looked, he stopped, searching for the word. Like when Dad's mum died. That kind. Sort of, Harry said. Yes. Dudley sat down heavily on the top step. He was large for 7 and growing, and he sat the way his father sat, taking up space as a default state. Is it about your mum? Your real mum? Yes. A pause. Was she actually magic? Not just, Dudley waved his hand in a vague gesture that Harry understood to mean not just a story. Yes, Harry said. Really magic. Dudley absorbed this. He had the particular expression of a child who has been told something enormous and is deciding whether to believe it, and then deciding that it explains some things, and then deciding to ask the question he actually wants to ask. Are you? Like, can you actually do things? The pencils on the side table in the hall, 3 of them, sitting in a ceramic pot by the telephone, rose smoothly into the air, formed a slow neat triangle, and descended back into the pot. Dudley stared at them. Then at Harry. Then at them again. Yeah, Harry said. Cool, Dudley said, at last, and he said it with the total unguarded sincerity of someone who hasn't yet learned to be threatened by things outside their understanding, before all the layers of what his father and the world would teach him about that had fully settled in. For a moment Harry saw him very clearly, not Dudley as he usually was, loud and indulged and frequently unkind, but Dudley as he could be, which was just a kid. The kitchen door opened and Petunia came out. She looked at Harry on the stairs, then at Dudley on the top step, took in the whole scene with a single glance. Your father is taking you to Grandma's, she told Dudley. I know, Dudley said. Then, after a moment, can you show me more later? This was directed at Harry, and Dudley said it casually, like it didn't matter, like he hadn't just crossed something and wasn't sure if crossing it was allowed. Harry looked at him. Yeah, he said. All right. Dudley nodded, very dignified, and went back to his room. Petunia watched him go, and then looked at Harry, and said nothing, but there was something in her face. Ready? Harry said. 5 minutes, she said. Get your shoes. They took the train from Little Whinging to Paddington, and then the Underground to Charing Cross Road, and Petunia walked the whole way with her handbag over one arm and Lily's grimoire in it and her list in her coat pocket, and she walked the way she did everything, like she knew where she was going and was mildly annoyed at the world for being in her way. Harry walked beside her and felt his magic running through him like a current, quiet and easy and enormous, and watched the city go by and thought about his mother. She'd written him a letter. A letter that should have arrived this morning on his birthday, written in October 1981 by a 21-year-old woman who knew she was running out of time and had used some of that time to make sure her 7-year-old son would hear her voice. Somewhere in Dumbledore's office was that letter, sitting in a pile of intercepted post, unopened, unread, as if it were just administration. Harry thought about this and felt the current in his chest run a little faster, a little hotter, and then he breathed out and it settled. One thing at a time. Petunia stopped in front of a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, grubby-fronted, easily missed between the shops on either side of it, the sort of place Muggle eyes tended to slide off without registering. Harry looked at it and felt the pull of it, a sort of recognition that had nothing to do with memory, like a word in a language you've never been taught but somehow understand. This is the entrance, Petunia said. She was looking at the grimoire, open to a section Harry hadn't seen before. Your mother wrote very clear directions. You can see it? Harry said. The pub. I've always been able to see it, Petunia said, with a slight edge to her voice that meant this was something she'd thought about and put in a particular box. Your mother used the word sensitive, in her notes. I don't have magic. But I perceive things others can't. I always have. She put the grimoire back in her bag. She said it was why I could perform the role of guardian. The blood ward that ties you to this house requires someone with enough magical sensitivity to consciously maintain it. Dumbledore counted on me fulfilling that role without knowing I was doing it. She pushed open the door to the Leaky Cauldron. Come along. The Leaky Cauldron smelled of old wood and something slightly burnt and a specific variety of humanity that gathered in places where the rules are slightly different from everywhere else. It was dim in the way old pubs are dim, with light sources that seemed to be doing their best, and populated with figures who looked, to Harry's newly unlocked senses, like a different quality of present than the people on the street outside. The barman, elderly, bald, impressively warty, looked up as they entered. "Visiting Diagon Alley, are we?" he said, in the tone of someone who says this many times a day. "Gringotts," Petunia said. "Through the back, I believe." "Through the back, yes ma'am." He was looking at Harry now, in a way that meant he was looking at Harry's scar, which Harry had recently learned was apparently famous in a world he'd never been properly introduced to. "Is that?" "Yes," Petunia said, crisply. "Through the back?" "Right this way," he said, pulling himself together. Harry followed Petunia through the pub and out into the small back courtyard, and watched her consult the grimoire again, and then take her umbrella. She carried it even when it wasn't raining, it was a Petunia Dursley habit as reliable as gravity, and tap the bricks in the pattern Lily had recorded. The wall opened. Harry had expected it to be impressive. He hadn't expected it to be like this, Diagon Alley opening up in front of him in the morning light, busy and loud and smelling of parchment and strange ingredients and something sweet from a cart nearby, full of people in robes and pointed hats and owls on shoulders and cats winding between legs and 100 things he had no name for yet. It was chaotic and colorful and entirely real, and it was his, in the way that the magic was his. It had always been there, waiting for him to be allowed to see it. He stood in the entrance for a moment and just looked. Petunia let him look for exactly 10 seconds. "Gringotts," she said, "is at the end of the main street. The white building." He could see it, enormous and gleaming at the far end of the alley, with its massive doors and the goblins flanking the entrance with a quality of alertness that made them look less like guards and more like judges. "I know," he said, though he didn't know how. "Let's go." They walked the full length of Diagon Alley and people noticed Harry in the way he was apparently going to have to get used to, the stares, the nudges, the pointed whispers. He ignored them. Not in a head-down, make-yourself-small way. He walked at full height, at his own pace, looking at everything with the frank curiosity of someone who has been kept away from something and intends to take it all in now that he's allowed. A woman near a shop doorway actually pressed her hand to her mouth when she saw his scar. Petunia noticed and stepped slightly to his left, positioning herself between Harry and the woman, not looking at her, just present. A small, unconscious gesture that Harry noted and filed away. They walked up the marble steps of Gringotts and through the enormous doors, and Petunia presented herself to the goblin at the first desk with the manner of someone who has made an appointment. "I need to see someone senior," she said. "It concerns a guardianship contract. An old one. With 19 articles." The goblin looked at her. Looked at Harry. Looked at the grimoire she'd placed on the counter. Something changed in the goblin's expression, not surprise exactly, because goblins seemed constitutionally resistant to surprise, but a sharpening, an intensification. It said something in its own language to the goblin beside it, and that goblin turned and disappeared quickly down a corridor. "One moment," the first goblin said, with the precise diction of someone who has been speaking a second language so long it's become more natural than the first. "We will arrange an appropriate appointment." "Immediately, please," Petunia said. "We've been waiting 7 years already." A pause. Then the goblin said, with something that might, in better light, have been a very small smile, "I believe the director will see you now." They were led through corridors that went progressively deeper into the building, and into a room that was large and high-ceilinged and lined with the kind of shelves that hold things that matter, ledgers and sealed boxes and instruments Harry couldn't identify but felt the weight of. At the desk at the far end sat a goblin who was older than the ones they'd seen before, in the way that certain things are old, not diminished by it, but made more itself. "I am Ragnarok," the goblin said. "Director of Gringotts, London. Sit, please." They sat. Ragnarok looked at the grimoire on the table, which Petunia had placed between them. He didn't touch it yet. "You are the guardian," he said to Petunia. "Yes. And you are the child." To Harry. "Harry Potter," Harry said. "Yes. Ragnar looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the old goblin's eyes, not warmth, exactly, goblins didn't do warmth, but something that was attentive in a different way than pure calculation. Something like recognition. "We have been expecting someone to come," Ragnar said. "Not this soon. But we have been expecting it." He folded his long hands on the desk. "Gringotts does not approve of what has been done. I want that on record before we begin. We are bound by law and by financial obligation, and some of what occurred, the guardianship proxy, the account access through an unverified representative, was within the edges of the law. But we did not like it." He looked at the grimoire. "May I?" Petunia slid it across the desk. Ragnar placed one long finger on the cover. The clasp, which had been sealed since dawn, opened on its own. He turned to the contract pages and read them with the speed of someone who is reading something familiar, checking, confirming, rather than learning. 19 articles, he said. Activated at, he consulted the date stamp that had appeared in the contract's header, 4:47 yesterday afternoon. Full contract. Binding commences upon first reading, which was completed. He turned to the final page, 5:37 this morning. He looked up. "You read through the night?" "Yes," Petunia said. "Without magic. Without any guidance." "I had my sister's notes." Something in Ragnar's expression shifted. "Your sister," he said, "was an exceptionally unusual witch. This contract is the most sophisticated piece of privately created blood magic we have seen in this building in 40 years. The seals on it," he stopped himself. "This is not the time for admiration. This is the time for action." He closed the grimoire, stood, and crossed to one of the shelves on the left wall. From it he took a large, flat black ledger, the kind that had clearly been waiting for a purpose. He set it on the desk. "Let us begin with Articles 4 through 6, he said. "The financial rights. The account rights. And the correspondence." He looked at Harry specifically, direct and serious. "There is a great deal waiting for you, Mr. Potter. Years of it." "I know," Harry said. Ragnar opened the ledger. "Then let's sort it out," he said, and he said it with the brisk, satisfied air of someone who has been waiting a long time to do something they're very good at and has finally been given permission to start. Outside, Diagon Alley continued its morning. Inside Gringotts, in a deep-set room where the shelves held decades of careful record, a 7-year-old boy sat across from the director of the oldest magical bank in Britain and watched the careful architecture of someone else's control over his life begin to come down, piece by piece, in perfectly ordered sequence. He sat very straight. He asked clear questions. He listened to every answer. He felt, underneath everything, the steady certainty of his mother, not in the room, not in any literal sense, but in the grimoire, in the contract, in the 17 years' worth of careful, loving preparation that had led to this exact chair on this exact morning. She had built this moment from the inside out, brick by brick, in the time she had left. He was going to make use of every single piece of it. They had been in Gringotts for 3 hours when Petunia pressed the tip of her finger against the seal at the bottom of the 14th article, and the ledger recorded it, and Ragnar turned to a fresh page. 14 of 19 articles addressed, Ragnar said. The financial accounts are restored to direct guardianship. The correspondence block has been formally challenged. We will file the injunction with the ministry this afternoon. The properties are unfrozen and accessible upon provision of the Guardian seal, which will be prepared for you by tomorrow morning. Petunia was making notes. Harry was watching Ragnar. The remaining 5, Harry said. What do they require? Articles 15 through 19. Ragnar looked at his own notes. 15, the right to magical world knowledge and introduction, is resolved simply by you being here and us speaking to you. He turned a page. 16, unrestricted magic expression, requires a formal removal of the suppression record from the ministry's registry. That is a Wiesengemot matter. He looked over his glasses at Harry. Someone placed a restriction on your magical core and filed it with the Ministry as a safety measure. To remove it officially requires either the person who placed it to withdraw it, or a Wisengamot hearing to override it. He won't withdraw it, Harry said. No, Ragnarok agreed. I wouldn't expect him to. He moved on. 17. Your parents' personal effects. Also a Wisengamot matter, as they are held under a Dumbledore proxy order. He paused. 18. Sirius Black, Petunia said, looking up from her notes. Ragnarok's expression changed. Not dramatically, the shift of a muscle or two, the settling of something that had been held in suspension for a long time. Yes. Sirius Black. He set his pen down with deliberate care. Mr. Black was, and I am speaking with complete precision here, wrongly imprisoned. Gringotts has known this for some years. We have the relevant documents, the legal evidence, the family records. We have not been able to act because no one with legal standing over the Potter estate has been in a position to bring the matter forward. He looked at Petunia. As of 5:37 this morning, someone is. The room was very quiet. He's been in Azkaban? Harry said. Since November 1981. Without trial. Ragnarok said it flatly, the way you say something outrageous when you've had years to become numb to it. Without trial. Charged with the murder of 12 muggles and the betrayal of James and Lily Potter. He did none of these things. The actual perpetrator has been free the entire time. He looked at Harry. Your godfather has been in prison for your entire life and no one with the power to challenge it has done so. Harry said nothing for a long moment. He looked at his hands on the table, the hands that had glowed gold in Dudley's old bedroom yesterday afternoon when everything began to change, and he thought about a man in a prison who had loved his parents and who had his name in Lily's contract as the person she trusted most. Article 19, he said. The right to determine your own future. Ragnarok met his gaze. Also Wisengamot. Everything from 16 through 19 goes before a formal tribunal. He paused. Which brings me to something I want to say very clearly. What you are doing, what this contract enables, will not go unnoticed. Dumbledore will know. He may have already detected some of what has changed, the suppression seal breaking, the ward monitoring dissolving. We should assume he will act. I expect him to, Petunia said. Ragnarok looked at her with the particular quality of attention he'd reserved for things that impressed him. You are prepared for that? I am prepared for a great many things, Petunia said. I had a very useful night. She capped her pen. When can we file for the Wisengamot hearing? I will file today, Ragnarok said. We are a party to this matter, Gringotts will stand as co-filer, which will prevent it being buried or delayed. We have standing. He closed the ledger. You will likely have a date within the week. He paused, then looked at Harry again. There is one more thing. He reached into his desk and produced an envelope. Cream parchment, sealed with green wax, addressed in a handwriting Harry had not seen before. He turned it over and read the back. To Harry. To be opened when you are ready, and not before. You'll know when that is. Sirius. This arrived at Gringotts the day Sirius Black was taken to Azkaban, Ragnarok said. He came here first. Before they arrested him. He had, apparently, a feeling. Something shifted in the old goblin's face. He left this, and he said, if they take me, give it to Harry when Harry comes for it. He said, he'll come. He looked at the envelope. He was right. Harry reached out and took it. It was solid in his hand, real, with the specific weight of something that has been waiting a long time to be picked up. I'll read it later, he said. He put it in his pocket, next to his chest, next to the ember that had been burning since yesterday afternoon and showed no sign of going out. Thank you. Ragnarok stood. extended his hand, formal, precise, the gesture of an institution meeting an equal. "Gringotts is glad you came, Mr. Potter." He nodded to Petunia. "Both of you. We will be in touch before tomorrow morning regarding the Guardian's seal and the filing confirmation." Petunia shook his hand with the straight-backed efficiency of someone who has been shaking professional hands their entire life. Harry shook it too, and met the old goblin's eyes, and held them. Outside, they emerged from Gringotts into the afternoon light of Diagon Alley, and Petunia checked her watch and said, "We should eat," in the tone of someone who has done an enormous amount of work and is keeping herself together through the applied discipline of the next practical task. "There's a place that smells good over there," Harry said, pointing. They went. They sat at a small table outside, and Petunia ordered tea and a sandwich and Harry ordered whatever the equivalent of a birthday meal was when you were in a magical shopping street on the day the world tipped over and became something different and better than it had been before. The afternoon was warm and bright. Somewhere in Azkaban, a man named Sirius Black had spent another day not knowing that his letter had finally been picked up. Somewhere in Hogwarts, an old man with half-moon spectacles was beginning to notice that the monitoring wards on number 4 were very, very quiet. And in a small table outside a cafe in Diagon Alley, a 7-year-old boy with his dead mother's eyes ate his birthday meal in the afternoon sunlight and felt, for the first time in his life, like the story was moving in the right direction. Chapter 3, The Letter from a Dead Woman's Hand. They were nearly back to the leaky cauldron when Harry stopped. He'd felt it before he understood it, a shift in the quality of attention around him, the way the air in a crowded space changes when something in it focuses. He turned, casually, not making it obvious, and looked back along the length of Diagon Alley. 3 people. Not together, spread out, positioned at different points along the street with the careful spacing of people trying to look like they aren't watching the same thing. One near Gringotts steps, reading a notice board with slightly too much concentration. One beside a robe shop, examining a display that didn't merit the interest. One, and this one was less careful, either less experienced or less concerned about being noticed, standing near the mouth of a side alley with his eyes directly on Harry. Harry looked at that one long enough to make eye contact. The man looked away immediately, which confirmed it. "We're being watched," he told Petunia. She didn't turn around. "I know. Since we left Gringotts." She kept walking. "Don't stop again. Keep moving." "Who are they?" "Order of the Phoenix. Your mother wrote about them, they're Dumbledore's organization. People loyal to him." She steered them left toward the leaky cauldron entrance with the smooth unhurried certainty of someone who has done nothing wrong and is simply going about their day. "He'll know we were at Gringotts by now. Possibly before. I suspect the suppression seal breaking triggered something. He's having us followed the same day the contract activates," Harry said. "He moves quickly. I'll give him that." She held the door of the leaky cauldron open. "We should give him nothing interesting to report." They went through the pub and out to the street and caught the underground back toward Paddington without incident. Petunia sat straight-backed in her seat with her handbag in her lap and her list folded in her coat pocket and didn't look at anything in particular, and Harry sat beside her and put his hand in his pocket and felt the shape of Sirius's letter against his fingers. He hadn't opened it. He'd meant what he said to Ragnarok, "I'll read it later," because later meant somewhere private, somewhere he could read it properly and give it the attention it deserved. A man who had walked into Gringotts before his arrest and left something for a 1-year-old, trusting the bank to keep it until that child grew enough to come and collect it, that man deserved more than a hurried read between appointments. He left it in his pocket and watched the city move past the underground windows and thought about Dumbledore. The man had moved fast. Watchers in Diagon Alley within hours of the seal breaking. That meant he had people already in position, or he deployed them with very little warning. He was organized and he was reactive and he clearly wasn't planning to wait and see what happened. Harry thought, good. I'm not planning to wait either. They were home by 6. Vernon's car was gone, he'd taken Dudley to his mother's as instructed, apparently without further argument, which told Harry something about what Petunia had said to him in the kitchen that morning. Harry went upstairs while Petunia went to the kitchen and came back down 20 minutes later with tea and the organized quality of someone who had decided that the next hour was for reading. He sat on his bed and took out the letter. The parchment was thick and cream-colored and had been sealed with wax. A dog, he thought, pressed into the seal before it dried. Black wax. The flap was still fully sealed despite 11 years in a Gringotts vault, which was either goblin preservation magic or something to do with the paper itself. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded it. Sirius Black's handwriting was large and slightly impatient, the writing of someone who thinks faster than their hand can move. It was dated November 2, 1981. Harry, if you're reading this then you're old enough to come to Gringotts yourself, which means things have gone wrong in the specific way I was afraid they would, which means I was right, which under the circumstances I don't feel even slightly smug about. Here's what happened, as concisely as I can manage because I can hear them coming and I've only got a few minutes. Peter Pettigrew faked his death. He killed 12 muggles and cut off his own finger and transformed and ran, and everyone thinks I did it because I was the one standing in the street when the dust cleared. By the time anyone figures out the truth I'll be in Azkaban or dead, and if I'm in Azkaban I won't be able to tell them because nobody listens to prisoners, and Dumbledore, I don't know if Dumbledore will look for the truth. I want to believe he will. But he moves things around on a board and sometimes the truth isn't the piece he needs in a particular spot, and I can't count on it. I can't count on anything right now except this: I know who you are. I know what you're going to grow into. And I know your mum is too smart and too stubborn to leave you without a safety net. So this is me, in whatever vault they put this in, telling you, don't let them manage you. Whatever they've set up, whatever arrangements Dumbledore's made, whatever story you've been told about your life, find the truth. Your mum's in there somewhere, she'll have found a way. When you come for this letter you're already doing it. Good. Keep going. The Rat. Peter Pettigrew. Find him. He has a finger missing on his right hand and he's been in his rat form since November 1981 and he will have hidden himself somewhere warm and safe near humans, because that's what he does. Find him and you find the proof and you get me out. I am coming for you the second I'm free. You are my family. You are James and Lily's and you are mine, and I should have been there from the first morning and I wasn't, and I'm sorrier about that than I know how to say in the 3 minutes I have left. Be brilliant. I know you are. Serious P.S. Your dad would have been absolutely insufferable about you inheriting his eyes and your mum's face. Just so you know. Harry read it twice, slowly. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases and held it in both hands and sat very still for a moment. Not sad. He felt the sadness around the edges, the year-old man who should have been there, the 11 years in a prison for something he didn't do, but what was at the center of it wasn't sadness. It was something cleaner and more certain than that. Peter Pettigrew. Finger missing. In rat form since 1981. He put the letter carefully with the grimoire on the desk and went downstairs. Petunia was in the kitchen with her list. He put the letter in front of her without comment and watched her read it. Her expression didn't change much, but her hand, where it rested on the table, pressed down slowly until the knuckles whitened. She finished. Set it down. Looked at Harry. A rat, she said. A rat, Harry confirmed. He's an animagus, that means someone who can transform into an animal. He's been hiding as a rat since 1981. Somewhere warm and safe near humans, Petunia said. She looked at nothing for a moment. Then she looked at Harry. Ron Weasley, she said. There's a family, the Weasleys are mentioned in your mother's notes as part of the Order of the Phoenix. They have a son named Ronald who is roughly your age. Your mother mentions him as a likely future school friend. She paused. She also mentions, as a footnote, that the Weasley family has had the same pet rat for 9 years. Since 1982. The kitchen was very quiet. Lily noticed, Harry said. She noticed everything, Petunia said. She wasn't sure. She said it felt like something she was probably wrong about, and then she crossed it out and noted it anyway in smaller letters at the bottom, because she wasn't entirely wrong about anything and she knew it. Petunia stood and began moving toward the kettle with the precise efficiency of someone converting shock into action. This will need to be part of the Wiesengemot hearing. Ragnarok needs to know. I'll write to him tonight, Harry said. Petunia filled the kettle. Set it on. Turned around. How do you know how to write to a Gringotts director? I don't know how I know, Harry said. But I know there's an owl office in Diagon Alley and that you can post to anyone from it and that official magical correspondence addressed to a bank director gets there the same day. He paused. The seal breaking didn't just free my magic. I think it freed everything it was keeping quiet. Petunia looked at him with the expression she reserved for things that were outside her knowledge but not outside her acceptance. Then write the letter tonight, she said. And I want to know what else you know that you don't know how you know. That's a lot of the same word. Don't be smart, she said, but without any real heat. Please. The letter to Ragnarok took Harry 40 minutes, which was longer than it should have been because he'd never written a formal letter to anyone before and had to work out the register as he went. He kept it straightforward, what Sirius had said about Pettigrew, what Lily had noted about the Weasley family's rat, a request that Gringotts included as supporting evidence in the Wiesengemot filing. He signed it Harry James Potter, in care of his legal guardian Petunia Dursley because that felt right, legally, and because writing it that way made something settle in his chest. Petunia read it over his shoulder. Said, good. Post it first thing tomorrow. Went to bed. Harry sat at the desk in the quiet of the house and opened the grimoire to a section he hadn't looked at yet, the middle portion, which wasn't contract and wasn't instruction but was something more personal. Notes Lily had made about Harry specifically, things she'd observed in the first year of his life, things she'd thought about late at night while James was on order business. He read for a long time. She wrote about the first time he'd produced accidental magic, 4 months old, turning his own mobile into a flock of paper birds. She wrote about the way he laughed, how he discovered that if he laughed hard enough small things floated. She wrote about James bringing him a toy broomstick and how the photo they'd taken of Harry's face seeing it had sat on their mantelpiece until the house was destroyed. She wrote, I know who he is already. I know the shape of him. He is not frightened of anything he doesn't understand, he just wants to understand it. He is going to be extraordinary, and I don't mean the prophecy, I mean him. Specifically him. The way he is. Harry closed the grimoire at 1 a.m. and lay on top of his covers in the dark and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in a prison surrounded by water, a man who loved him had been waiting for 11 years. He wasn't going to wait much longer. Dumbledore came on the 3rd day. Petunia had been expecting it, she'd mentioned it twice, in the way she mentioned things she was prepared for but not pleased about, and had spent those 3 days in a state of quiet, comprehensive preparation. The Guardian seal had arrived from Gringotts on the morning of the 2nd day, a flat disc of deep red wax impressed with a complex pattern that Ragnarok's accompanying note said was registered in the Ministry's legal records as of this morning, and cannot be challenged without triggering a full guardianship review. She wore it on a chain around her neck, underneath her blouse, where it sat against her breastbone with the pleasant warmth of something that knows its own purpose. Harry spent the 3 days reading, the grimoire, then a stack of books that had apparently been in his parents' vault and which Gringotts had arranged to have delivered along with the seal. Old books, careful books, the kind that had been handled for years by someone who loved learning. His father's transfiguration notes in the margins. His mother's charms annotations in the columns. A library's worth of knowledge and handwriting he was just beginning to recognize. His magic, freed of the suppression, was doing what suppressed things do when the lid comes off, not exploding, nothing as crude as that, but expanding steadily outward, testing its own dimensions. He was careful with it. Not afraid of it, never afraid of it, but respectful, the way you respect the size of something new that you haven't fully mapped yet. He could feel where the edges were and he kept track of them, and every morning they were further out than the day before. Dudley had come home on the evening of the first day, subdued in the way he was when his father and grandmother had both been managing him in a small space for too long. He'd found Harry reading in the front room and had sat in the chair across from him and watched the book for a while and then said, "Can you make something move without looking at it?" Harry had moved the TV remote from the arm of Vernon's chair to the coffee table without looking up from the page. Dudley had watched it travel across the room with the look of someone crossing something off an internal list. "Cool," he said again, and went to get a snack, and that had been the tone of their interaction since, Dudley watching, occasionally asking a question, Harry answering without ceremony. It was not the beginning of anything warm. But it was the beginning of something honest, which was better. Vernon had come back and gone very quiet, the particular quiet of a large man who has been told something he doesn't know what to do with and has decided that doing nothing is the safest response. He looked at Harry differently. Not kindly, just cautiously, with the wariness of someone realizing they've been wrong about the load-bearing walls in a house. On the morning of the third day Harry was in the back garden, sitting on the back step with one of his father's old books, when he heard the front doorbell. He didn't move. He felt Petunia move, her footsteps precise and unhurried across the hallway, and he felt something else, too, from the front of the house. A quality of magical presence that he had no reference for but which was, quite simply, enormous. Dense and old and complicated, like standing near something that has been accumulating weight for decades. He turned a page. The front door opened. He heard Petunia say, in her front door voice, polished, perfectly controlled, "Professor Dumbledore." And then a voice he had never heard before but somehow recognized anyway, the way you recognize a sound you've been warned about, "Mrs. Dursley. Forgive the intrusion. I wonder if we might come in," Petunia said. "Not warm. Functional. We'll talk in the sitting room." Harry put his bookmark in, stood up, and went inside. Albus Dumbledore was tall, which Harry had expected, and old, which he had also expected. What he hadn't expected, or rather, hadn't had a frame for, was the quality of attention he brought into a room. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't threatening. It was more like standing in a room with a lighthouse, a steady, sweeping awareness that periodically fixed on you with the full weight of an extraordinarily intelligent mind. He was wearing robes that were, in the context of Privet Drive, completely absurd, deep blue, with silver detailing at the collar, the kind of thing that should have looked theatrical but on him just looked like his clothes. He had half-moon spectacles and an exceptionally long silver beard and eyes that were, Harry had read this somewhere and now confirmed it, a very bright blue that was not especially comforting up close. He stood in the sitting room doorway and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Dumbledore's expression did something interesting. He'd clearly been expecting a child and he'd gotten one. Harry was 7, small for his age, in jeans and a too-large jumper, standing in a muggle sitting room with a book under his arm. But there was something in his expression that recalibrated, quickly, at what he saw in Harry's face. Something that was nearly surprise and then became something more careful. "Harry," he said. "My goodness. You've grown." "I've never met you," Harry said pleasantly. "So you haven't got a frame of reference for that?" "A beat." Dumbledore smiled, warm, practiced, with the quality of someone who smiles very well. "No. I suppose not. You're right to point that out." He sat in the chair Petunia indicated, which put his back to the window, which Harry noted because Petunia had clearly arranged the seating with purpose. "I understand there have been some significant developments over the past few days." "Sit down, Harry," Petunia said. Harry sat. Not because he'd been told to, he'd decided to sit before she said it. He sat because it was useful, because it made him look less like a confrontation and more like a conversation, and because he wanted to watch Dumbledore in his chair before anything else happened. "Several things have changed," Petunia said. She was in the chair across from Dumbledore, straight-backed, with the Guardian seal under her blouse and the grimoire on the side table next to her, visible. She'd placed it there on purpose too. I imagine you know what most of them are. I've been aware of some changes, yes. Dumbledore's eyes moved to the grimoire and stayed there for just a moment, one small pause in an otherwise fluid composure. Lily's work. I recognized the binding on the cover. He looked at Petunia. She was always thorough. She was, Petunia said. She was also right about you. Dumbledore absorbed this without visible injury. I suspect her notes on the matter are pointed. She described you as a man of genuine good intentions who has allowed those intentions to excuse actions that required permission he didn't seek. Petunia's voice was even and clear. I thought that was quite restrained. Dumbledore smiled again, but it was different this time, less practiced, more considered. She was always more generous than I deserved. He looked at Harry. How are you, Harry? Better than I've been, Harry said. Thank you for asking. Something in Dumbledore's eyes registered the quality of that answer. He looked at the child sitting across from him, who was not squirming, not nervous, not performing any of the behaviors 7-year-olds perform in the presence of authority figures, and adjusted something internally, visibly. I'd like to explain, he began. I have the contract, Petunia said. I have 17 of 19 rights formally recorded at Gringotts. I have a guardian seal registered at the ministry as of 2 days ago. Whatever explanation you'd like to offer, I want you to know that it won't change any of those facts, and I've heard Lily's version, which I trust considerably more. That's fair, Dumbledore said, and he said it with something that Harry thought might be genuine respect. You're clearly not here to listen to me defend myself. I'm here to tell you what happens next, Petunia said. And to give you the opportunity to either cooperate or explain to the Wizengamot why you shouldn't. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. You've read the grimoire. Most of it, Harry said. Then you know what I did and why I did it. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and there was something in his posture now, less the practiced authority and more something underneath it, older and more honest. Harry, everything I've done has been to protect you. The placement here. The monitoring. The suppression, you caged his magic, Petunia said. I limited it. For his safety and for the safety of everyone around him. A child with his level of power, unsupported, in a muggle environment, you caged it, Petunia said again, the same words at the same temperature, and the repetition was somehow more effective than argument. You made a decision about his development without asking anyone who loved him, and you dressed it as protection, and you renewed it annually for 7 years. Dumbledore sat back slightly. Yes, he said. I did. Harry looked at him. Why did you take my parents' things? A pause. They're in trust. Safe, catalogued, mine, Harry said. They're mine. Why did you take them? To keep them safe until you were old enough, you could have left them with Petunia. You could have asked. You didn't ask. Harry's voice was completely level. Not angry, factual, precise, the voice of someone laying out an argument that is so clear it doesn't need heat. You made every decision about my life because you decided you knew best. And maybe you did know best about some things. But knowing best and being allowed aren't the same thing, are they? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something passed over his face, not embarrassment, too complex for that. Something closer to what you feel when you've been speaking in a language you thought only you understood and someone answers you in it. No, he said quietly. They're not. The Wizengamot hearing, Petunia said, bringing them back. It's been filed. Gringotts is co-filing. The remaining 5 rights are going before a tribunal. You have the choice to contest it or to cooperate with an orderly transfer. She held his gaze. I want Sirius Black's case included. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression. Something real and unguarded and, Harry thought, guilty. Sirius, he said. He's innocent, Harry said. I've had concerns, Dumbledore said, carefully. For 11 years? Harry's voice was still level. You've had concerns for 11 years and you haven't acted on them? The situation was, the evidence against him was, he didn't have a trial, Harry said. Ragnarok told me. He didn't have a trial, which means there was no official evidence of anything, which means the evidence you're describing is what someone told you. He paused. Is that right? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. Yes. Someone told you Sirius betrayed my parents and you believed them and put him in Azkaban without asking for proof. He was not technically, I did not place him in Azkaban, that was the Ministry's, you could have stopped it, Harry said. You had the power to stop it and you didn't. He said it without cruelty, because it wasn't about cruelty. It was about the truth being in the room and someone needed to say it plainly. My godfather has been in prison for my entire life because you didn't ask enough questions. The room was very quiet. Petunia sat with her hands folded and said nothing, letting the silence sit. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment, and his eyes were doing something complicated, and Harry let him look, and waited. You are very much like your mother, Dumbledore said finally. I know, Harry said. She left me enough notes. Dumbledore, despite everything, made a sound that might, in slightly different circumstances, have been a small laugh. He looked at Petunia. I won't contest the hearing. I'll cooperate with the transfer of the remaining 5 rights. He paused. I would like to ask, not demand, ask, for the opportunity to speak with Harry myself, as he gets older. Not to manage things. Just to speak with him. That's Harry's choice to make, Petunia said. They both looked at Harry. He thought about it honestly. Dumbledore was not a simple villain, he understood that already, at 7, from 100 pages of his mother's carefully reasoned notes. He was a man who had made real choices for real reasons and had been wrong in specific ways and right in others, and he was powerful enough that having him as an outright enemy would be stupid, and Harry was not stupid. When I'm ready, Harry said. On my terms. Of course, Dumbledore said. And I want my mother's letter, Harry said. The one that was redirected to your office. The one she wrote in October 1981 for my 7th birthday. Dumbledore went very still. You have it, Harry said. You must. The redirect's been in place since 1981, which means everything that was posted to me went to Hogwarts. Including that. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I want it. Harry, it's mine, Harry said. She wrote it for me. Another long silence. Dumbledore reached into his robes, unhurried, deliberate, the movement of someone making a decision they should have made years ago, and produced an envelope. Cream parchment. Sealed with green wax. Addressed in handwriting Harry had been learning for 3 days from the margins of old textbooks. He crossed the room and held it out. Harry took it. I'm sorry, Dumbledore said. Not to the room. Directly to Harry, quietly, with the weight of something that meant it. I am genuinely sorry, Harry. Not for everything, I believe some of what I did was necessary. But for the things that weren't, and for the things I didn't question when I should have, yes. I'm sorry. Harry looked at the envelope in his hands. I know you are, he said. It doesn't fix everything but it's a start. Dumbledore nodded once, put on his hat, extraordinary, purple, should have been ridiculous, and looked at Petunia. The hearing date. I'll cooperate fully. And I'll begin the process of withdrawing the remaining proxy orders. He paused at the sitting room door. Lily would be, he stopped. Started again. She would be very pleased. With both of you. He left. The front door opened and closed. His presence receded from the house like a tide going out, that enormous density of awareness pulling back until the sitting room felt its own size again. Petunia let out a slow breath. Harry was still looking at the envelope. "Are you going to open it now?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "But I want to do it alone." "Of course." She stood. "I'll make lunch." Harry took the letter to his room and sat on his bed and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, 7 years of waiting in the palm of his hand. Then he broke the seal. His mother's handwriting, when she'd written this, had been urgent, faster than the Grimoire, less precise, the writing of someone trying to get everything down before time ran out. "Harry, happy birthday, my love. You're 7 today, which means you've been in the world long enough to know your own name and your own face and at least the beginning of who you are. I hope they've been good years. I hope you've had birthday cake and someone to read to you at night and a room of your own. I hope the world has been kind to you. I know it may not have been. I know because I know the arrangements, and I know what's possible, and I've done everything I can to build you a way out. But knowing isn't the same as being there, and not being there is the one thing I can't fix, and I'm sorry for it every single day. You have your father's talent for magic and my stubbornness, and I need you to use both. Don't let anyone make you small. Don't let anyone tell you what you're for before you've had the chance to decide it yourself. The prophecy is real, but prophecies are not instructions, they are possibilities, and what you do with a possibility is your choice. I want to tell you about your father. James Potter was the most infuriating and loving and brave person I have ever known, and he died protecting us both, and he would have been an absolutely ridiculous dad in the best possible way. He would have taught you to fly before you could walk, and he would have lost you in a Quidditch supply shop more than once, and he would have told terrible jokes until you groaned and then told them again because your groan made him laugh. He loved you completely from the first moment he saw you. I want you to know that. I want to tell you about Sirius. Your godfather. He is reckless and loud and ferociously loyal, and he loves you like you belong to him, because you do. Whatever happened to him, and if you're reading this something happened, because he should have been there, find the truth. He deserves the truth. I want to tell you about Remus Lupin, who is the kindest person I have ever known, who will help you if you find him. Tell him I said the password is Moonlight Library, and he'll know who you are. I want to tell you that you are not a weapon. You are not a symbol. You are not a sacrifice. You are my son and you are James's son, and you are entirely your own, and everything else is secondary to that. I want to tell you I love you in a way that doesn't end, not with death, not with distance, not with anything. You came from me and I am still in you in every way that matters, in the stubbornness, in the magic, in the way you'll find that you already know things without knowing how you know them, in every book I read to you in the first year of your life that settled itself into your memory even before you had words for it. I'm in you, Harry. I will always be in you. Happy birthday, my love. Mum. He sat with it for a long time. Not crying, somewhere past crying, in the place beyond it that is quieter and more complete. The sun was moving across the race-car wallpaper. The house smelled of whatever Petunia was making in the kitchen. From Dudley's room came the familiar sounds of afternoon television. The ember in his chest had changed. Still there, still warm and steady, but different now, fuller. The way a fire is different when you understand it's been lit by someone specific, for you, with intention. He held the letter for a long time and then he folded it carefully and put it with Sirius's letter and sat up straight and thought about what came next. Remus Lupin. Moonlight Library. He'd write that down and find him. He'd find Peter Pettigrew, which meant the Weasley family's rat, which meant a careful approach. He'd attend the Wisengamot hearing and watch Petunia dismantle 11 years of assumed authority in front of a court of law. He'd get Sirius Black out of Azkaban. One thing at a time. Forward motion. He went downstairs to eat lunch and found Petunia at the stove, and the kitchen smelled good, and Dudley was already at the table stealing bread rolls, and Vernon was reading his paper in the corner with his newly cautious quiet, and none of this was a family in any storybook sense. But it was real, and it was now, and he was in it with his eyes fully open. "It was good?" Petunia said, not turning from the stove. She meant the letter. "Yes," Harry said. A pause. "Good." He sat down and Dudley offered him the bread rolls, unprompted, casually, as if he'd been doing it for years, and Harry took one, and outside the back garden was green and ordinary in the afternoon sun, and somewhere in the world things were in motion that couldn't be stopped. He bit into the roll and planned his next move. That evening, Ragnar's reply arrived. It came by a bird Harry had never seen before, not an owl, something darker and faster, which arrived at the kitchen window, dropped its letter on the sill, and left before anyone could move. The letter was written on Gringotts stationery, very brief, in Ragnar's precise script. "Mr. Potter. Mrs. Dursley. Your information regarding Peter Pettigrew has been cross-referenced with family magical registries. Gringotts holds on record an unregistered animagus entry from 1981, a government registration that was never properly filed, in the name of a rat registered to Arthur Weasley's household at the Borough, Ottery St. Catchpole, Devon. The registration was incomplete and has been flagged as suspicious in our system for 9 years. We are including this in the Wisengamot filing. Additionally, your Wisengamot hearing date has been confirmed. 8 days from today. The ministry attempted twice this afternoon to delay the filing. We declined both requests. The hearing will proceed. Come prepared." Ragnar, Director Harry read it. Passed it to Petunia. Watched her read it. She looked up. 8 days. Enough time to prepare, Harry said. He was thinking about the Weasley family and their rat and a man named Peter Pettigrew who had lived for 11 years in borrowed warmth, and about whether there was a way to move on that front before the hearing or whether it would be more useful to let Gringotts handle the evidence side and wait for the tribunal. He decided to wait. Pettigrew wasn't going anywhere, he'd been sitting still for 11 years on the assumption that no one knew where to look. He could sit still for 8 more days. "I want to write to Remus Lupin," Harry said. Petunia paused. "He's mentioned in the Grimoire. My mother's letter too. She said to find him. She left a password." He looked at Petunia. "Do you know how to find someone in the wizarding world if you don't have an address?" "Owl Post," Petunia said. "Lily's notes explain it. You address the letter to them by name and the owl finds them." She paused. "We don't have an owl. The owl office in Diagon Alley offers a postal service." Petunia wrote that down on her list. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "First thing." He wrote the letter to Lupin that night, brief, careful, using the password his mother had given him, explaining just enough that Lupin would understand without putting anything sensitive in an unsecured letter. He sealed it and addressed it in the way the grimoire described and left it ready on the desk. Then he sat in the quiet of his room and looked at the 2 letters on his desk, Sirius's and his mother's, side by side, and thought about what it meant to be 7 years old and already in the middle of changing everything. Not frightening. Not overwhelming. Just real. Genuinely, completely real, the way things are when the pretend versions of them fall away and you're left with the actual shape. He turned off the light. Tomorrow the post would go. In 8 days the hearing. And somewhere in a prison surrounded by grey water, a man who called him family was one step closer to the door. Harry Potter, 7 years old, closed his eyes and went to sleep in a house that was becoming, slowly and imperfectly and without ceremony, something slightly closer to home. Chapter 4, The Shape of a Man Who Means Well. Remus Lupin arrived on a Thursday. He didn't knock. He stood at the end of the front path for a moment, looking at the house with the particular expression of someone recognizing a place from a description rather than a memory, and then he opened the gate with the careful deliberateness of someone who wasn't entirely sure they were welcome and had decided to come anyway. Harry saw him from the upstairs window. Medium height, lean in the way people are lean when they've been poor for a long time, in a set of robes that had been good quality once and were now just clean and well mended. Brown hair going gray at the temples. A face that had more lines in it than his age warranted, in the way faces do when they've carried heavy things for years. He moved carefully, Harry noticed, not timidly, but with the deliberate economy of someone who was always aware of exactly how much space they were taking up. Harry was down the stairs and at the front door before Petunia could get there from the kitchen. He opened it. Lupin stopped on the front path. He looked at Harry, and something in his face did what Dumbledore's had done, recalibrated, adjusted, landed somewhere that wasn't quite what he'd prepared for. Then it did something else entirely, something deeper and less controlled, because unlike Dumbledore he hadn't steeled himself properly and because Harry's face was what it was. James's nose, Lupin said softly, mostly to himself. Lily's eyes. He stopped. Drew a breath. "Hello, Harry." "Hello," Harry said. "Come in." Petunia's made tea. He sat in the same chair Dumbledore had sat in 3 days ago, which meant Petunia had arranged the seating the same way, window behind him, and Harry was beginning to understand that this was simply how his aunt operated, environment as argument, positioning as preparation. She probably didn't even think about it consciously anymore. Lupin held his teacup with both hands. He was looking at the grimoire on the side table. "She finished it," he said. "You knew about it?" Harry said. "I knew she was working on something. She wouldn't tell us the details, she said the less we knew the better, that it needed to be between her and the magic and whoever found it." He paused. "She told me once, about 3 weeks before she died, that she had made arrangements. She said, Remus, I have made arrangements, so stop worrying." As if that was possible. The last words were quiet, set down carefully. "Did it work?" Harry asked. "Did you stop worrying?" "No. But I believed her, which was something." He looked at Harry directly. "She was right to. Obviously." He glanced at Petunia. "The password in your letter. She gave that to you in the letter she wrote you for your 7th birthday." "Yes. She wrote me one too. A letter to be opened, a specific condition, which I won't bore you with. It arrived 2 days ago. That's why I'm here." He reached into his coat, muggle clothes, Harry noticed, under the robes, and produced a letter in Lily's handwriting which he clearly had no intention of reading aloud but which he'd brought as proof, or possibly just because he needed it near him. She was thorough. "So everyone keeps saying," Harry said. "She would have hated that. She liked being underestimated." A small, genuine smile crossed Lupin's face, and in it Harry could see the shape of a younger man, someone who had once been easy with happiness, before whatever had happened to him had happened. "What can I do? You said in your letter you needed help. What kind?" "The Wisengamot hearing is in 5 days," Harry said. "We have everything we need from Gringotts, the financial rights, the guardianship documentation, the filing. But Articles 16 and 19 are about my magical development and future education, and I want someone who knows that world in the room when those are argued." He looked at Lupin steadily. "I want someone who knew my parents and who will speak truthfully about what they would have wanted for me." Lupin was quiet for a moment. "You want a character witness." "I want someone who loved them and will say so in public." "I'm not in the best standing," Lupin said carefully. "In the wizarding world. My condition," he stopped, looked at Petunia, clearly uncertain of her knowledge. "Lily explained it in her notes," Petunia said, with the tone of someone who has moved on from finding something extraordinary and is now simply dealing with it as a fact. "We know." Lupin blinked. "Of course she did." He looked back at Harry. I've been living quietly. Doing what work I can get. People don't exactly," he stopped again. "I don't care," Harry said. "About the condition. I don't care what anyone thinks about it either. My mother trusted you. That's the only reference I need. Something in Lupin's face went very still, and then very carefully not still, and he looked down at his tea with the focused attention of someone managing an emotion that has surprised them. All right, he said, after a moment. Yes. All right. Good. Harry picked up his own tea. Tell me about my dad. Lupin looked up. Not the war, Harry said. Not the prophecy or Voldemort or any of that. Just, him. What was he like? And Lupin, who had clearly come here prepared for legal logistics and documentation and had not at all prepared himself for this question, looked at a 7-year-old boy with James Potter's nose and Lily Potter's eyes asking to know his father, and he put his tea down and he began. He talked for 2 hours. He told Harry about James in the first year at Hogwarts, arriving on the train with Sirius, 2 11-year-olds with too much energy and no idea of their own volume, scattering into the compartment and immediately rearranging the social dynamics of every person in it. He told Harry about the Marauders, himself, James, Sirius, and Peter, the 4 of them bonded by proximity and late nights and eventually by the extraordinary lengths James and Sirius had gone to become animagi for Remus's sake. He told Harry about the specific brand of James Potter mischief that was never mean, fundamentally, always targeted at people who deserved it, always more performance than cruelty, always with the slightly manic glee of someone who finds joy genuinely contagious. He told Harry about Lily, too, not the way people who had been rivals told it, but the way Lupin told it, which was the truth, that they had circled each other for years, James too certain of his own charm and Lily too impatient with it, and then James had grown up in 6th year in a way that surprised everyone including himself, and Lily had looked at this different version of him and found that she'd been ready to look for a while. He told Harry about the wedding, which had been small because the war was closing in, and about James at the altar with the expression of someone who cannot believe his own luck and is determined to deserve it. Petunia sat through this with the particular stillness of someone receiving information they've been refusing to want for years. She said nothing. But she refilled her tea twice and didn't look away from Lupin's face once while he spoke. Harry listened to all of it with the same complete attention he gave his mother's grimoire, sitting still, taking it in, building a picture not from descriptions but from details. Not James was brave, but James once jumped off the astronomy tower on a bet and transfigured himself mid-fall into a bird and then back again on the landing and looked insufferably pleased with himself for a week. Not Lily was kind, but Lily once spent 3 months tutoring the most difficult student in their year without being asked because she'd noticed he was struggling and couldn't afford to admit it. Real people. Specific people. Not myths. Peter, Harry said, when Lupin paused. Lupin's expression changed. Something that had been warm and open closed down slightly, not against Harry, but around itself, the way wounds do. What about him? He's alive, Harry said. We know where he is. Lupin set his cup down very slowly. What? Harry told him about Sirius's letter. The rat. The Weasley family pet. The Gringotts registry. Lupin listened to all of it with the stillness of someone who has just felt the ground shift under them and hasn't decided yet whether to move. 9 years, Lupin said finally. He's been, 9 years. Living as a pet. While Sirius has been in Azkaban, Harry said. Something moved across Lupin's face, complicated and not entirely controlled, grief and rage and guilt mixed together in the way they get mixed when someone has spent years with all three. I should have looked, he said quietly. After Sirius was taken I should have, I was so certain. I believed what they told me. You believed what everyone believed, Harry said. Because you trusted Dumbledore and Dumbledore didn't ask enough questions and Peter made sure there was nothing left to question. He looked at Lupin steadily. You're not responsible for what Peter did. You're only responsible for what you do now. Lupin looked at him for a long moment. How are you 7 years old, he said. My mother left me very good notes, Harry said, which was becoming something of a reliable answer. Lupin made a sound that was part laugh and part something else entirely. He pressed the heel of his hand briefly against his eyes and then straightened up and was, when he emerged from it, different, more present, more decided, the theoretical layers stripped off. "The hearing," he said. "I'll be there. And if there's anything I can do about Peter before then, let Gringotts handle the evidence," Harry said. "Don't approach him directly. He's been hiding for 11 years, if he panics we lose him." Lupin looked at him again. Nodded. "All right. Come back tomorrow," Harry said. "I have questions about magical theory and I'd rather ask someone who knew my mother than read it out of a textbook." "You could do both," Lupin said. "I'm doing both," Harry said. "I want the conversation too." After Lupin left, Petunia stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking out at the garden. Not at anything specifically. Just, outward, in the way people look when they're processing something that has no immediate action attached to it. Harry came and stood beside her. She was happy with him, Petunia said. Not a question. Not really to Harry. Yes, Harry said anyway. With all of them. With that whole world. A pause. "I spent so long telling myself it was separate from me. That she had her world and I had mine and they didn't touch." She turned the tap on and rinsed a mug she'd already rinsed. "They touched. They've been touching the whole time. She turned the tap off. "I just looked away." "You're not looking away now," Harry said. She turned from the window. "No." She picked up her list, which was on the counter where it always lived, and looked at it. "Remus Lupin. Do we need a formal role for him at the hearing or does witness testimony suffice?" "Witness testimony is fine," Harry said. "Ragnarok will structure the hearing. I want to go over the structure tonight. All 5 articles. I want to know what Dumbledore has agreed to concede and what he'll argue on." She moved to the table and opened the notepad to a fresh page. "Sit down. Let's go through it." They sat down. They went through it. This was, Harry had realized over the past few days, how Petunia functioned when she cared about something, not warmth, not the outward performances of investment, but this, full attention, rigorous preparation, zero tolerance for gaps. She asked questions that exposed the weak points in their position before anyone else could, and then she filled those gaps, and by the time she was satisfied there were no gaps left. It was, Harry thought, not unlike how his mother had written the Grimoire. Different in temperature entirely, but the same underlying architecture. Both of them had loved by building things that held. The second unexpected visitor came the next morning, before Lupin, which was before any of them were fully ready for visitors. Harry was in the back garden attempting something he'd read about in one of his father's books, a specific kind of wandless casting that required directing magic through intention rather than gesture, more precise than what he'd been doing naturally since the seal broke. He was sitting cross-legged in the grass with 3 stones in a line in front of him and was trying to move only the middle one, which was genuinely difficult because his magic's natural tendency was to move everything in a field rather than a single target. He'd gotten it to tremble. He was working on move. The knock at the front door was loud and fast and before Petunia reached it, Harry had felt the magical presence behind it and was already on his feet. Not enormous like Dumbledore's. Different, sharp, electric, with the specific quality of a person whose magic was very close to the surface, barely leashed, pressed up against the edges of whatever was containing it. The magic of someone who had been living in a very small space for a very long time and had not forgotten what larger spaces felt like. He came through the house as Petunia opened the door. The man on the doorstep was thin, gaunt, genuinely, in the way of someone who had not eaten properly in years. Long dark hair that hadn't been properly cut in probably as long. His clothes were, wrong, too large, institutional gray in a way that put Harry in mind of photographs he'd seen, in Lily's notes, of Azkaban. His face was sharp and hollow-cheeked but the bones of it were good and the eyes were very much alive, dark gray, taking in everything at once with the focus of someone who has learned to read environments very quickly as a survival skill. He was looking at Petunia when the door opened. Then he looked past her and saw Harry. He went absolutely still. And Harry, who had never seen this man's face except in a description in a letter written 11 years ago by someone who knew him, felt the ember in his chest flare up hot and immediate the way flames go when someone opens a window. "How?" Petunia said, very carefully. "They let me out," Sirius Black said, and his voice was rough from disuse, graveled and raw. "This morning. Early. Something to do with a Gringotts filing, a formal innocent statement in the Wisengamot papers that triggered some emergency provision." He stopped. He was still looking at Harry. Ragnarok moved fast. "He said he would," Harry said. Sirius made a sound, and it was not entirely steady. "You found the letter?" "Yes." "You came to Gringotts?" "Yes." He stopped again, pressing his mouth together for a moment. When he opened it again his voice was more controlled but only technically. "Your mother built all of this?" "The contract." "The whole?" "Yes," Harry said. "She built all of it." Sirius looked at him for a long moment, at the face he'd apparently been thinking about for 11 years, and then he crossed the threshold and crouched down to Harry's eye level, which put them face to face, and he said, quietly and very directly, "I'm sorry I wasn't there. From the first morning. I should have been there." "I know," Harry said. "You said so in the letter." "I meant it." "I know that too." Harry looked at him, this man who was supposed to have been there from the start, who was supposed to have been the one reading to him at night, who had instead been somewhere grey and cold and unjust, and felt the enormity of that without drowning in it. "Are you all right?" Sirius blinked. He'd clearly not expected to be asked that. "Not entirely. Not yet. I will be." He stood up, straightened. There was something still electric about him even in this reduced state, something that would clearly be magnetic once he'd eaten properly and slept and had enough time out of a cell. The bones of who he was were still there, the charm, the fierceness, the quality of attention that was a different kind of intensity than Dumbledore's but no less complete. "Petunia Dursley," he said, turning to her. "Lily wrote about you." "I'd imagine she did," Petunia said, measuring him. "She said you were the most practically capable person she'd ever known and that she was counting on that." He met her gaze. She was right about both, apparently. Petunia accepted this with a slight nod. "Come in. I'll make breakfast. You look like you need it." "I need about a year of it," Sirius said. He stepped inside and looked around at Privet Drive, at the aggressively normal hallway, the precisely vacuumed carpet, the framed print of the English countryside on the wall, with an expression of complete bewilderment. "This is where you've been living?" "This is," he looked at Harry. "You grew up here?" "Yes," Harry said. Sirius looked at the hallway again. Then at Harry. Then he said, with something that was the beginning of the person he'd been before all of this, "Your dad would have had a proper nervous breakdown." Harry felt something unexpected rise in him, light, quick, warm. It was, he realized, the first time he'd laughed. Not just smiled, laughed, actually laughed, the kind that starts in your chest. The racecar wallpaper upstairs would have finished him off entirely, he said. Sirius's face broke into something that wasn't quite a grin yet, too out of practice, but was the shape of one, the same way a muscle remembers movement. Absolutely. He would have repainted the entire house with a wave of his wand and considered it an act of mercy. He followed Harry toward the kitchen. "You have your mother's laugh. You're the first person to have heard it," Harry said. And Sirius stopped walking for just a moment, just one beat, and then kept moving, and didn't say anything, but the muscle in his jaw worked once and Harry understood and gave it room. Breakfast with Sirius Black was, it turned out, one of the stranger experiences of Harry's short life, which was saying something given the week he'd had. Sirius ate with the focused determination of someone making up for years of porridge and water. He ate 3 plates of eggs and 4 pieces of toast and 2 cups of tea, and Petunia kept providing more without comment, which was its own kind of thing. Dudley came downstairs halfway through, looked at Sirius, looked at Harry, sat down, and helped himself to the remaining toast without ceremony. "Who are you?" Dudley said, to Sirius, with the directness of a child who has recently had its worldview substantially expanded and is still catching up. "Sirius Black," Sirius said. "That's a weird name." "My whole family had weird names," Sirius said pleasantly. "My brother was Regulus. My cousins were Narcissa and Bellatrix. At least Sirius is a star. Bellatrix is a star too, but she got the personality to match." Dudley processed this. "Can you do magic too?" "Extensively," Sirius said. Dudley looked at Harry. "Your family's very strange." "I know," Harry said. Vernon appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8:20, in his work clothes, and took in the scene, his kitchen containing a gaunt long-haired stranger in grey clothes who was on his 4th piece of toast, and said nothing for a full 4 seconds. "Who is Sirius Black?" Petunia said. "He'll be staying for a while." She turned from the counter with her own tea. "Don't be late for work, Vernon." Vernon looked at Sirius. Looked at Petunia. Made a series of internal calculations that Harry could see happening in his face, and concluded, correctly, that the most sensible thing was to eat his own breakfast and leave. He left. Sirius watched him go. "Is he always?" "Yes," Harry said. "Lily wrote about him too," Sirius said, carefully. "What did she say?" Petunia asked. Sirius glanced at her. "She said he wasn't a bad man, just a frightened one, and that the magic arrangement was probably harder on you than it looked, and that she was sorry she left you in it." He paused. "She also said you were stronger than the arrangement and she knew you'd find your way through it." He looked at his tea. "She was always saying things like that about you. Even when you two weren't speaking. She'd mention you in letters and it was always," he stopped. "She never stopped thinking of you as her sister. Even when things were, I don't know, complicated." The kitchen was quiet. Dudley had stopped eating and was looking at Petunia, which none of them were quite doing. "Right," Petunia said, after a moment. Her voice was completely normal. "We need to discuss the hearing. It's in 4 days. Remus Lupin is coming this morning to go through the witness statements. I'll need you to give yours this afternoon. Ragnarok needs formal depositions by tomorrow evening." Sirius blinked. "You've already, I have been organizing this for a week," Petunia said, with the tone of someone pointing out an obvious fact. "Your deposition will take approximately an hour, I imagine. I have a standard format from Ragnarok's office. What happened on the night of the 1st of November 1981, specifically, where you were and what you did." She picked up her pen. "Start from the beginning when you're ready. We'll do a practice run now and the formal statement this afternoon." Sirius stared at her. Then at Harry. Yes, Harry said. "She is. Your mother mentioned she was organized. I may have underestimated the scope of that." "Everyone does," Harry said. "It's actually quite useful." Petunia tapped the notepad. "When you're ready." Sirius straightened in his chair and Harry watched this happen in real time, pulled himself together. The slouch of exhaustion corrected itself. The eating to survive urgency settled. Something in his expression shifted from the raw unguardedness of a man who had just walked out of the worst experience of his life and into the sharpness of someone remembering who he was. Not fully, it would take time, weeks, probably longer, but the shape of it was there, rising. "The 1st of November, Sirius said. "I went to Godric's Hollow in the morning because something felt wrong. I found the house. He stopped. Breathed. I found what was left. And Harry, just, sitting there. In the rubble. And I picked him up and I brought him out of the house and Hagrid arrived, which means Dumbledore knew almost before I did. Hagrid, Petunia said, writing. The large man. Yes. He had a motorbike. He said Dumbledore had sent him to take Harry. I gave him the motorbike. He pressed his mouth together for a moment. I should have kept him. I should have taken him straight to you, or kept him with me, but I gave him to Hagrid because I was not in my right mind, and I thought I knew where Peter was and I needed to find him, and then I found him and Peter shouted that I'd betrayed James and Lily in a street full of muggles and then he blew up the street and cut off his finger and ran and when the smoke cleared there were 12 bodies and I was the one standing. The kitchen was completely quiet. And you were arrested. Ministry orders were there within minutes. Someone had seen. And I didn't fight it. I didn't fight it, which I've had 11 years to think about. I laughed. I couldn't stop laughing, which I think frightened them more than anything. He looked at his hands on the table. Not because it was funny. Because it was so completely, impossibly, he searched for the word. It was the most enormous wrong thing I had ever seen and the laughter was all I had that wasn't screaming. Harry said nothing. Lupin had warned him, in the brief time they'd had together yesterday, not to try to fix Sirius's grief, that it was old and complicated and that what Sirius needed was not comfort but company. Just someone in the room who already knew the truth. Petunia was writing. Her pen moved steadily across the page, taking down every word. Not because she'd hardened herself to it, Harry could see, in the set of her shoulders, that she was not hardened at all. But because this was how she helped, and she was helping. Everything after that, Petunia said. What can you testify to about Peter Pettigrew's registration as an animagus? And Sirius, who had registered as an illegal animagus at 17 in a school corridor and therefore knew exactly how the registration did and didn't work, began to talk. Lupin arrived at 11 to find Sirius sitting at the kitchen table. The two of them looked at each other across the room for a long moment, and something passed between them that had 12 years of history in it, the grief of what had happened to the group of them, the particular specific pain of two people who had each thought the other complicit in the worst thing and now had to stand in the same room with the full knowledge of how wrong that was. Then Lupin crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and pulled Sirius into a grip that was briefly fierce and then steady, and Sirius held on with the same quality, and neither of them said anything, and Harry and Petunia took their tea to the sitting room and gave them the room. Will they be all right? Harry asked. Eventually, Petunia said. People who love each other and hurt each other generally manage it if they're both willing to try. She opened the notepad. Lupin's testimony. I want to run through his section this afternoon as well. He knows James better than almost anyone still alive, Harry said. He can speak to what my parents intended for my education. That's what Article 16 needs, testimony that the suppression seal went against everything they'd have wanted for me. And 19? Article 19 is about my right to choose my own path. The argument there is simpler. I'm 7, legally, but the contract's activation means I have standing to express preference, and my preference is Hogwarts on my terms, not Dumbledore's curriculum plan. Harry picked up his tea. Ragnarok said he has a precedent from 1743. A minor expressed course preference over a guardian proxy. It held. Petunia looked at him. You've been reading Ragnarok's notes. He included them with the deposition forms. You're 7 years old. I'm aware. She looked at him for a moment with the expression that was becoming familiar, not warm, but something adjacent to it that was all her own. Don't let anyone at the hearing intimidate you. The Wisengamot is full of people who are very good at looking important. Look back. I know, Harry said. Look back, she said again, with emphasis. Not down, not away. Back. Hold their eyes until they're the ones who look somewhere else. Harry looked at her steadily. Good, she said. Like that. Exactly like that. By the afternoon all four of them were at the kitchen table. Sirius had showered and borrowed clothes from Vernon's wardrobe that didn't fit at all and didn't care, and Lupin had the contained, determined quality of someone who has processed something enormous and filed it away for later because there are immediate tasks. Petunia had 4 pages of notes and a structure for the hearing that she'd drawn up in 3 color-coded categories: conceded by Dumbledore, contested, evidence required. 16 and 19 are both contested, she said, running through it. Dumbledore has agreed to the financial rights, the property rights, the correspondence rights, the information rights. He has not explicitly agreed to remove the suppression seal record from the Ministry registry or to relinquish the educational proxy. He'll fight 19, Sirius said. He always does. It's the one that matters most to him. If he loses control of Harry's path, he loses control of the prophecy strategy entirely. Then we take it from him in court, Harry said. All 3 adults looked at him. In public, Harry continued, in front of the Wisengamot, with Ragnarok's backing and 2 witnesses who knew my parents and a legal argument from 1743. He looked at each of them. He can argue it. He should argue it. I want him to argue it in public where everyone can see him arguing that he should retain control over a 7-year-old's future against the wishes of that 7-year-old's legal guardian. He paused. He's too smart to do that. But we should be prepared for it anyway. Sirius was looking at him with an expression Harry couldn't quite read. Then he looked at Lupin, and Lupin looked back, and something passed between them, recognition, the kind that comes from knowing someone's parents well enough to see them in their children's face. He has her exactness, Lupin said quietly. And his confidence. He has all of it, Sirius said, and his voice was careful and full and not quite steady. He has all of it. I'm sitting right here, Harry said. We know, Sirius said. That's the point. They went back to the notes. They worked until dinner and through it and after, and Petunia made tea 4 times and Sirius ate everything put in front of him with the single-minded focus of someone making up for lost time, and Lupin filled in details of magical law that none of the others knew, and Harry listened and questioned and pushed on every weak point until it held. By 10 o'clock, Petunia's list had no gaps. By 11, Sirius was asleep in the spare room, the first proper bed he'd slept in 11 years, which nobody mentioned but everybody knew, and Lupin had gone home with a copy of his prepared testimony and a promise to be at the ministry an hour before the hearing. Harry was in his room with the light off, lying on his back, going through the hearing structure in his head the way you check over something before you need it. Every article. Every piece of evidence. Every counter-argument. He felt, underneath all of it, the specific quality of being ready. Not because he wasn't nervous, he was, in the way you're nervous before something that matters, the useful kind of nervous that sharpens things. But because being ready and being nervous weren't mutually exclusive and he was both, and both were fine. In 3 days the hearing. In 3 days Petunia with her list and Sirius with his testimony and Lupin with his 12 years of truth and Ragnarok with the full institutional weight of Gringotts Bank, all of them in a room together, taking back everything that was owed. Harry stared at the ceiling and felt the ember in his chest burn steady. Outside, Privet Drive was doing what it did at night, perfectly quiet, perfectly still, every light off and every curtain drawn, the whole street arranged into its regular performance of ordinariness. It had been performing it for 7 years while Harry Potter slept in a cupboard under the stairs. It had performed it while letters went unread and rights went unreclaimed and a man sat in a prison for something he didn't do. The performance was almost over. Chapter 5, What the Wisengamot Owes the Ministry of Magic smelled of parchment and old power and the specific bureaucratic anxiety of a building where everyone is simultaneously very important and acutely aware that someone else might be more so. They arrived at 8 in the morning, an hour before the hearing, through a telephone box on a side street off Whitehall that descended with a grinding mechanical dignity into the earth. Petunia stepped into it first, without hesitation, because she had read Lily's directions twice the night before and memorized them and that was simply how she operated. Harry followed, then Sirius, Then Lupin, who had met them at the entrance looking like he hadn't slept but had made his peace with that. The atrium was enormous and golden, with its fountain and its ceiling that didn't exist and its stream of witches and wizards moving through it with the brisk self-importance of people who work somewhere they consider significant. Harry walked through it with his chin up and looked at everything directly, and people looked back and the whispers started almost immediately. "Harry Potter, that's Harry Potter, did you see, is that," and he ignored all of it because it was background noise and he had more important things in the foreground. Ragnarok was waiting near the elevator bank. He was in formal Gringotts robes, deep charcoal, with gold at the collar, precise and severe, and he had 3 goblins with him carrying cases that Harry suspected contained enough documentation to reconstruct the entire sequence of events from 1981 to present. He looked at the group of them as they crossed the atrium, and something in his expression registered approval, though he kept it brief. "Mrs. Dursley," he said. "Mr. Potter." He glanced at Sirius and Lupin. "Both witnesses present." "Good." He looked at Harry specifically. "Are you ready?" "Yes," Harry said. "The Wizengamot chamber is on level 10. We have 45 minutes before the session opens." He turned toward the lifts. "Use them. I want to tell you what to expect." The prep room adjacent to courtroom 10 was small and smelled of old wood and tallow candles that had been replaced by magical lighting sometime in the last century but whose ghost remained. Ragnarok set his cases on the table and opened the primary one and spread documents across the surface with the efficient speed of someone who has done this many times. 37 members of the Wizengamot will be present, he said. Full formal session. This was unavoidable given the scope of the filing and the profile of the parties involved. The chief warlock is Bartemius Crouch Sr., who is a man of the law when the law suits him and of expediency when it doesn't. Be aware of him. Dumbledore sometimes occupies the chief warlock's seat, Lupin said. Not today. He recused himself from presiding, given that he is the responding party. Ragnarok produced a flat document and slid it to Petunia. This is the order of proceedings. Articles 16, 17, 18, and 19. 17 and 18, the personal effects and Sirius Black's case, are largely documentary. Gringotts presents the evidence, the Wizengamot votes. 16 and 19 will require testimony. Who speaks first? Petunia asked. Gringotts presents the petition. You respond as guardian. Dumbledore or his representative responds. Witnesses are called. The Wizengamot deliberates. Ragnarok looked at Petunia. Your testimony on Articles 16 and 19 should be under 3 minutes each. Clear. Factual. Emotional where genuine. The Wizengamot is not a collection of stones, most of them respond to a real person speaking the truth. But do not perform. They can smell performance. I don't perform, Petunia said. I know, Ragnarok said. That is why I'm telling you to stay exactly as you are. He turned to Sirius. You will be asked about the events of November 1st, 1981, and about Peter Pettigrew's status as an animagus. You will also be asked, almost certainly, about your mental state during your incarceration, which is an attempt to undermine your credibility. You will answer directly. You will not be defensive. Defensiveness reads as guilt. Sirius, who was wearing clean robes that Petunia had sourced from somewhere that morning without explaining how, looked leaner and sharper than he had 2 days ago. Not recovered, nowhere near recovered, but functional, and something in his dark gray eyes had the quality of someone who has decided what this day is for and has arranged himself accordingly. Understood. Mr. Lupin. Ragnarok looked at him. Your testimony establishes the intent of Harry's parents regarding his magical development. You will be challenged on your condition. Answer it plainly and then redirect to the substance of your testimony. Do not apologize for existing. Lupin nodded. Ragnarok looked last at Harry. You may be asked to speak. Directly, by the chief warlock or by a member of the Wizengamot. You are 7 years old and you have legal standing as the subject of the petition. You may speak or you may decline to speak, both are within your rights. He paused. What will you do? Speak, Harry said, without hesitation. Then speak simply. You are a child who knows what he wants and why. That is sufficient. You do not need to argue law, that is my function. You simply need to be what you are. I can do that, Harry said. Ragnarok held his gaze for a moment. Yes, he said. I believe you can. He closed the primary case. We go in 15 minutes. In the room, everyone made their last adjustments. Petunia reviewed her notes for the 4th time, not because she didn't know them but because reviewing them was how she converted preparation into certainty. Sirius rolled his neck and his shoulders and stared at the wall with the focused blankness of someone running things through in their head. Lupin sat quietly with his hands on the table, the particular stillness of someone who has made their peace. Harry sat beside Petunia and felt the ember in his chest, and outside in the corridor the ministry moved around them, and in 15 minutes they would walk into the room where the last 5 things that had been taken from him would be returned. He was ready to go and get them. Courtroom 10 was built to impress and it succeeded, in the specific way that places designed to remind you of your smallness succeed when you walk in already knowing that trick. High stone walls, tiered benches for the Wizengamot members arranged in a horseshoe, a central floor where the petitioner stood. Chains on the single chair in the center, those, Ragnarok had explained, were for criminal hearings. Today the chair was empty. Today the center of the floor was theirs. 35 members were already seated when they walked in. 2 more arrived in the minutes before the session opened, settling into their positions with the rustling importance of people who consider punctuality beneath them. Bartemius Crouch sat at the top of the horseshoe in the Chief Warlock's chair, a narrow man with a narrow face and the particular severity of someone who confuses rigidity with principle. He watched them enter with the neutral assessment of a person deciding how much this was going to inconvenience him. Dumbledore was in the gallery, not on the floor. He'd surrendered his seat as a member for today's session, standard procedure when you were the responding party. He was in robes of deep burgundy and he watched Harry walk in with an expression of careful attention that Harry met briefly and directly before looking away. The 3 Gringotts goblins took their position to the left. Ragnarok stood at the petition podium with his documents arranged. Petunia stood at the Guardian's position, 3 steps to the right, with her notepad and her Guardian's seal and the absolute calm of someone who has no doubt about the rightness of what they're doing. Harry stood beside her. Sirius and Lupin took the witness seats to the far left. Crouch called the session to order with a tap of his wand and the sound of it rang off the stone walls. Gringotts Bank, petitioning on behalf of Harry James Potter and Petunia Evangeline Dursley, legal guardian, in the matter of the binding contract of blood and choosing, Ragnarok began, and his voice in this room was different, still precise, but larger, filling the space with a formal authority that had nothing to do with volume. Petition covers Articles 16 through 19 of a 19-article binding contract, of which Articles 1 through 15 have been resolved by operation of law or by agreement of the responding party. Gringotts stands as co-petitioner and primary evidence holder. He presented Articles 16 and 17 with the brisk efficiency of a man who has organized his documentation perfectly and sees no reason to be anything other than direct. The suppression seal, its placement, its renewal, its effect on Harry's development. The documentation of Dumbledore's proxy order over the personal effects. All of it laid out in sequence, dated, cross-referenced. When he reached the personal effects, Article 17, he produced a sealed box and placed it on the petition table. Items catalogued from the Potter family vault, held under proxy order for 7 years, Ragnarok said. Personal letters from Lily Potter to Harry Potter, written over the first year of his life. Personal items of James Potter's, specified for Harry's inheritance. A recorded memory, a standard magical recording, of both parents, made when Harry was 6 weeks old, intended for his viewing. He looked at the Wizengamot. None of these items have been accessed or damaged. But none of them have reached their intended recipient. A ripple through the tiered benches. Not dramatic, just the shift of attention that happens when an audience registers something real. On behalf of the responding party, said a ministry solicitor standing at a separate podium, a brisk woman in grey robes who was representing Dumbledore in the formal sense since he'd recused from presiding. Headmaster Dumbledore acknowledges the proxy order and does not contest the transfer of personal effects to the petitioner's guardian. Article 17 is therefore resolved by agreement, Crouch said. Noted. Proceed. Ragnarok moved to Article 18. Sirius Orain Black, he said. Godfather of Harry Potter. Imprisoned in Azkaban from November 1981 to the present date. Imprisoned without trial. He let that sit for exactly long enough. I want to say that again clearly, because the Wisengamot's records on this matter are incomplete and I want the record corrected. Without trial. Not expedited trial. Not summary trial. No trial of any kind. Sirius Black was placed in Azkaban by Ministry orders acting on verbal accusation, with no formal hearing, no presentation of evidence, no opportunity for testimony. He looked down the length of the horseshoe at the members. This is a violation of 11 sections of the Wisengamot's own charter, which Gringotts has documented in full in Appendix C of the petition materials. The ripple in the benches was more pronounced this time. Crouch's narrow face had tightened slightly. Article 18 of the contract, Ragnarok continued, is the right to know that Harry Potter is not alone, that people who love him and are legally tied to him exist and are accessible. Sirius Black is the first name on that list. His wrongful imprisonment is therefore directly relevant to this petition, not merely tangentially. He produced the Gringotts registry documentation. We have, in addition, new evidence regarding the animagus registration of Peter Pettigrew, which was submitted to this hearing as supporting material on the morning of this session. Crouch looked at his papers. I have this. The rat animagus registered to the Weasley household. Yes. The documentation establishes that an unregistered animagus transformation was performed in 1981 and that the individual, Peter Pettigrew, has been living in transformed state in the home of the Weasley family since approximately 1982. Ragnarok looked up. We are requesting a ministry action order for retrieval and examination. We are also requesting the immediate formal review of Sirius Black's imprisonment, with the evidence of this petition as the basis. The ministry solicitor was on her feet. The responding party does not object to the review of Mr. Black's case. She paused, clearly reading from a note she'd just been handed. In fact, the responding party formally supports the immediate review and has provided his own testimony, submitted to the court this morning, regarding his belief in Mr. Black's innocence and his acknowledgement that the 1981 arrest occurred without his formal sanction. Dumbledore, in the gallery, was looking at the floor. Harry watched him for a moment, not with triumph, just with the clear-eyed observation of someone tracking a complicated person in a complicated moment. He looked tired. He looked, more than anything else, like a man paying a debt he'd been carrying for 11 years and had finally stopped arguing with. The court will take a brief recess, Crouch said, to review the Pettigrew materials. We reconvene in 20 minutes for Articles 16 and 19. The recess was 17 minutes. Harry spent it standing near the far wall of the courtroom, not in the prep room. He wanted to stay in the space, wanted to keep his bearings, and Sirius came and stood beside him. How are you doing? Sirius said. Good, Harry said. You? I've been in this building before under considerably worse circumstances, Sirius said, looking around the courtroom with the expression of someone taking inventory. This is better. He was quiet for a moment. They're going to approve the Black review. I can feel it from here. Crouch wants it off the ministry's record. A wrongful imprisonment is the kind of thing that reflects badly on the institution, and he minds about the institution more than almost anything. Even if he doesn't care about the injustice, the paperwork motivates him, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. That's a very cynical reading for a 7-year-old. Ragnock briefed me, Harry said. Of course he did. A pause. Your aunt is remarkable. Yes. She looks at Crouch like he's a slightly irritating planning committee. A beat of something that was very nearly serious as real laugh, not there yet but close. She's going to be extraordinary in there. She's been extraordinary for the past week, Harry said. She's been extraordinary for longer than that, I think. She was just pointing it in the wrong direction. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Lily used to say, he stopped. Started again more carefully. She used to say that Petunia's love was the inconvenient kind. That it didn't look like love because it looked like management. She said the people who loved like that were sometimes the most reliable people in the world because they never stopped. Harry thought about the list on the notepad. The 4 pages of notes. The tea at 5 in the morning. The toast made precisely right. Yeah, he said. I think that's right. The doors opened for reconvening. Harry straightened and walked back to his position. Article 16 first. Ragnock presented the technical case, the suppression seal, its mechanism, its effect on a magical core's development, the absence of parental consent, the absence of guardian consent, the fact that it had been renewed annually without notification or review. He presented it with the cold precision of a prosecution that doesn't need anger because the facts are damning enough on their own. Lupin was called. He walked to the testimony position and stood with the careful correctness of someone who knows they're being assessed on arrival and has decided that the most powerful response to that is simple composure. He stated his name, his relationship to the Potter family, and his status. He said I am a werewolf in the same voice he might have said I am a teacher, and he said it looking directly at Crouch because Crouch was the one in the room most likely to consider it relevant to credibility and the most important person to meet on it. Crouch said nothing. Some members of the Wisengamot did shift, not dramatically, but Lupin had expected it and didn't react to it. You were close to both James and Lily Potter, Ragnock said, from the petition position. As close as it's possible to be, Lupin said. James was one of my oldest friends. Lily I knew from school. We were in the same year at Hogwarts for 7 years and I was in a position to observe her development as a witch from early adolescence onward. He paused. She was the most naturally gifted witch I have ever personally known. And I have known Dumbledore. Several members of the Wisengamot looked up. In your view, as someone with knowledge of both parents, would James and Lily Potter have consented to a suppression seal being placed on their son's magical core? No, Lupin said. It was a short word and he didn't add to it immediately and the monosyllable sat in the stone room like a stone itself. Neither of them. James was a gifted natural caster, the kind that develops almost exclusively through free expression. He wouldn't have constrained Harry's magic for anything short of a physical safety emergency, and even then only temporarily. Lily, a pause. Lily's entire approach to magic was about understanding your own ability. She believed that restricting a child's magic was analogous to restricting their language. You don't make a child safer by teaching them they can't speak. You make them less able to protect themselves and less able to grow. He looked at Crouch. She wrote extensively about this. The grimoire that is part of this petition contains 8 pages on the subject of Harry's anticipated magical development and what she hoped for him. None of it includes the word restriction. The ministry solicitor rose. Does the witness believe that Headmaster Dumbledore's intentions in placing the seal were malicious? Lupin considered this with visible honesty. No. I believe he was afraid. I believe he looked at a 1-year-old child with an unprecedented amount of magical power and a prophecy attached to him and he did the thing frightened intelligent people sometimes do, which is control the thing they're afraid of before they understand it. A pause. That doesn't make it right. It makes it comprehensible. Those are different things. The ministry solicitor sat down. Crouch asked 2 technical questions about the seal's mechanism that Lupin answered with the authority of someone who had spent 20 years reading everything he could get his hands on by way of intellectual company. Then Lupin was released and returned to the witness seats, and Petunia was called. She walked to the testimony position and stood exactly as she stood everywhere, straight, composed, making no gestures toward approachability because she wasn't trying to be approached. She was trying to be believed. "Mrs. Dursley," Ragnarok said. "You are Harry Potter's legal magical guardian as of 7 days ago." "Yes." "When you accepted the contract, Article 7, the suppression seal, broke. What did you observe in Harry in the days following?" "He is more fully himself," Petunia said. "That's the clearest way I can put it. He was contained before. Not distressed, not diminished. Harry is not easily diminished. But contained. Since the seal broke, I have watched him read 3 advanced magical theory texts and retain and apply their content. I have watched him conduct a conversation with the director of Gringotts as an equal. I have watched him think strategically about a legal situation that would challenge most adults." She paused. "I don't know what he was before the seal broke. I only know that what I see now is what was supposed to be there all along." "Do you believe the seal was placed in Harry's best interests?" "I believe the man who placed it thought so," Petunia said. "I believe he was wrong in the specific way that people who are very powerful and very certain are sometimes wrong, completely, and with the best intentions, and with enormous consequences for the people they were wrong about." Crouch leaned forward. "Mrs. Dursley, you have no magical ability yourself. No. You have no prior knowledge of the wizarding world." "I have a great deal of knowledge of the wizarding world," Petunia said, pleasantly. "I simply acquired most of it last week. I read quickly." One of the Wisengamot members, elderly, on the left side of the horseshoe, with the look of someone who has been in this chamber long enough to appreciate an unexpected answer, made a sound that might have been amusement. Crouch moved on. "You have legal standing through the contract. But in practical terms, the magical world that Harry Potter will inhabit, the education he will require, the threats he may face, you have no direct experience of any of this. Why should this court believe that you are better positioned than Headmaster Dumbledore to determine Harry Potter's future?" Petunia looked at Crouch without any visible reaction to the question. Then she said, "I'm not asking the court to compare my qualifications to his. I'm asking the court to recognize that no one, regardless of their qualifications, has the right to make decisions about a child's future without the consent of the people who love that child." A pause. "I am not better positioned than Albus Dumbledore in terms of knowledge of the magical world. I am better positioned in one specific way: I am accountable to Harry. My decisions about his life can be challenged by him, questioned by him, overruled as he grows old enough to overrule them. Dumbledore's arrangements were not accountable to anyone. That is the difference. Not competence. Accountability." The chamber was quiet. Crouch was writing something. He didn't ask another question. Article 19 came last. Ragnarok's argument was clean and well-constructed and anchored in the 1743 precedent and 3 more recent cases he'd found in the Ministry's own records, buried in archived session minutes, in which minors with unusual magical circumstances had been granted standing to express educational preference over the wishes of appointed proxies. He laid it out without flourish. The law was the law. The precedent existed. Article 19, the right to determine Harry's own future, could not be held by a third party against the subject's wishes. The Ministry solicitor made her challenge. It was a competent challenge, centered on Harry's age, on the complexity of the decisions involved, on the legitimate concern that a 7-year-old could not reasonably be expected to understand the full implications of removing Dumbledore's oversight. Crouch looked down at the floor where Harry stood beside Petunia. He looked at him for a moment with the assessing expression of a man who was genuinely uncertain what he was looking at. "Harry Potter," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "You understand the substance of this article? What it means to have the right to determine your own path returned to you?" "Yes," Harry said. "It means that decisions about my education, my future, and how I engage with the choices in front of me belong to me and to my guardian. Not to anyone else without my consent. And what do you want? In simple terms. Harry looked at him directly. I want to go to Hogwarts when I'm 11 because I want to learn magic, not because anyone arranged it for me. I want to choose my own path through that and everything that comes after. I want to be treated as someone who has a say in his own life. He paused. That's not complicated. It's quite ordinary, actually. It's what every child wants. I just need the court to put it in writing so that wanting it is enough. Crouch looked at him for a long moment. I want to ask you something that isn't in the formal petition, Crouch said. You are under no obligation to answer. All right, Harry said. Are you afraid of Voldemort? The chamber went very tense, very fast, the particular tension of a room full of people who have avoided a word for years and have just heard it said plainly by a child. No, Harry said. I know about the prophecy. I know what it means. I'm not afraid of what I might have to do because I don't know yet what I'll have to do, and being afraid of things you don't know yet is a waste of energy. He looked at Crouch steadily. What I would be afraid of is growing up in a cage and being handed to a situation I don't understand because someone else decided I should be. That's what I'm here to prevent. Crouch sat back in his chair. He looked at Harry for another 3 seconds. Then he looked at the other members of the Wizengamot. We'll deliberate, he said. They waited in the corridor outside. Sirius paced, which Harry suspected was something he was going to do in enclosed spaces for a long time. Lupin sat on a bench with his hands loose on his knees. Petunia stood against the wall and recapped her pen and looked at nothing in particular. Harry sat on the bench beside Lupin and thought about nothing specific and let the morning settle. 22 minutes. The doors opened. Crouch read the findings from a document that had been signed by 26 of the 37 members. A majority of 3/4, which Ragnarok had told Harry beforehand was unusually strong and would make the findings much harder to challenge later. Article 16, the suppression seal record was to be formally expunged from the Ministry registry. The Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement was directed to audit any similar seals applied without guardian consent. Resolved in full. Article 17, the personal effects were transferred to Petunia Dursley as legal guardian, effective immediately. Resolved. Article 18, a formal review panel for Sirius Black's imprisonment was convened and its findings were, the chamber had clearly worked quickly during deliberation, appended to the finding document. The review found the imprisonment to have occurred without legal process. The Ministry was directed to issue a formal release order and an official exoneration. Charges expunged. Record cleared. Sirius made a sound beside Harry that was small and private and nothing like the size of what it meant. Harry didn't look at him. He gave him the moment. Article 19, the educational proxy held by Dumbledore's office was dissolved. All rights pertaining to Harry James Potter's future path, educational choices, and engagement with matters relating to the prophecy were returned to Petunia Dursley as guardian, with the express notation that Harry Potter had standing to co-determine these choices and that his expressed preferences held legal weight. The petition is upheld, Crouch said. All 19 articles of the binding contract of blood and choosing are now fully resolved. He looked down at the floor. We're done here. Outside the courtroom, in the corridor, Ragnarok produced the sealed box of Harry's parents' things from his case and handed it to Harry personally, without ceremony, which was the right way to do it. That's yours, he said. Thank you, Harry said. Gringotts will file the official record with the Ministry by end of day. You'll receive the complete documentation package at Privet Drive tomorrow morning. He looked at Harry with the same look he'd given him in that first meeting, attentive in a way that wasn't calculation, the look of someone taking note of something for its own sake. Your mother built something remarkable. I know, Harry said. So did you, Ragnarok said. Today. He inclined his head, the goblin equivalent, Harry had come to understand, of something considerably more significant than a handshake, and turned and walked back down the corridor with his 3 goblins, their cases, and the satisfied quality of a force that has done what it came to do. Sirius was leaning against the wall a few steps away, looking at the ceiling. Not at anything. Just at the ceiling of the Ministry of Magic corridor, breathing. Lupin was beside him, not touching, not speaking, just present in the way that mattered. Harry went over and stood on Sirius's other side. "You're free," Harry said. "Yeah," Sirius said. His voice was not entirely steady and he wasn't trying to make it so. "Yeah, I am. What do you want to do first?" Sirius looked down at him, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded Harry had seen it, all the layers stripped back, just the thing underneath. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I haven't had a first thing in 11 years. I need a moment to get used to there being a first thing." "That's fair," Harry said. Petunia appeared beside Harry. She looked at Sirius with the measuring expression she gave everything, and then she said, "The Ministry has a records office on level 2. If you want to retrieve your personal documentation, wand registration, property records, now is the time, while we're here and while you have the exoneration in hand." She paused. "After that I thought we might eat somewhere that isn't a Ministry canteen." Sirius looked at her. Something shifted in his face that was almost the full laugh, closer than it had been. "Lily definitely undersold you." "People generally do," Petunia said. "Level 2. Shall we?" They went. All 4 of them, down the corridor and into the lift, and the lift went up and the Ministry moved around them, and Harry held his parents' box against his chest and felt its weight, real and specific and finally, after 7 years, in the right hands. They ate in a muggle restaurant in Covent Garden because Sirius said he wanted real food and natural light, and he sat by the window and looked at the street outside with the focused attention of someone relearning that the world is large and mostly not grey, and ordered everything on the menu that had never appeared in an Azkaban kitchen, which was most of it. Lupin talked about where he'd been living, a small cottage in Wales, remote by preference, with enough distance from people that his monthly difficulty was manageable. He said it without complaint and without self-pity, and Harry noted the address when he mentioned it, with the intention of remembering it. Petunia ate her lunch and reviewed her completed list and drew a single line through the top section. She didn't make a production of it. But Harry saw it. "All 19, he said quietly. She looked at the list. Looked at him. "All 19, she said. He nodded. She folded the notepad and put it in her handbag, and that was all. Sirius was watching this exchange with the expression of someone still calibrating a situation he hadn't fully mapped. "What happens now?" he said. "Practically. Day to day. You need somewhere to live," Petunia said. "You have your family property, Grimmauld Place. It's been unoccupied, according to the records. Occupied by my mother's portrait and 12 years of dust and things I'd rather not think about," Sirius said, with feeling. "Then clean it," Petunia said. "I'll help if necessary. I find cleaning clarifying." Sirius looked at her for a moment. "You would, wouldn't you?" He turned his glass in his hands. "I want to be near Harry. That's what I want. Whatever the arrangement is. You can visit as often as makes sense," Petunia said. "Harry will be at Privet Drive until Hogwarts. After that," she glanced at Harry. "That's largely his decision, as of this morning." Harry looked at Sirius. "I'd like to stay at Grimmauld Place in the summers," he said. "If that works." Sirius went very still for a moment. Then, "Yeah," he said. "That works." "Good," Harry said. Lupin was watching this with a quiet half-smile, the expression of someone watching something settle into its right shape after being wrong for too long. He looked, for the first time since Harry had met him, not exactly lighter, too much history for light, but less heavily held down. Harry looked around the table. Sirius with his window and his overloaded plate. Lupin with his careful composure and his genuine warmth. Petunia with her folded list and her straight back and her tea held at exactly the same angle it always was. He thought about his mother's letter. "I love you past the end of everything." He thought about Sirius's letter. "You are my family." He thought about the 19 things that had been taken and were now returned, every one of them, and he thought about what came next, Hogwarts at 11, and the world that was out there, and the choices that were his to make, and the prophecy that was a possibility and not an instruction, and a man named Voldemort who was somewhere barely alive waiting to not be. None of it frightened him. All of it was real. Both things were true. "Thank you," he said, to the table generally, to no one specific and everyone at once. Nobody asked what for. They all knew. Outside in Covent Garden the afternoon was warm and ordinary and full of people going about their lives, and in a restaurant window a 7-year-old boy who had spent his first 7 years being kept deliberately small sat in the full knowledge of who he was and what he had and what was coming, and chose to be hungry and present and here. His mother had been right about everything. Chapter 6, Harry Potter. On his own terms 3 weeks after the hearing, Sirius found a rat. Not the rat, not yet, but a rat, a completely ordinary brown rat in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place at 2 in the morning, and he sent Harry a letter about it the next day that was 3 paragraphs of increasingly hysterical rat-related panic and one final paragraph that said, "I know it's not him, it didn't have a missing finger, but Moony and I spent 45 minutes chasing it around the kitchen and I think I need you to know that I am fine and the rat is also fine but my dignity is not." Harry read it at the kitchen table at Privet Drive and laughed until Petunia came in and looked at him with the expression she reserved for things that were clearly funny but which she was not going to acknowledge as funny in front of witnesses. She asked to read the letter. He handed it over. She read it and said, "The man spent 11 years in Azkaban and he's frightened of a rodent," and then turned back to her tea. But her shoulders were doing something. "That was almost a laugh," Harry said. "It wasn't," she said. "It really was. Eat your toast." He ate his toast. The 3 weeks since the hearing had settled into something that wasn't routine exactly. Too many things were still new for routine, but had the quality of a rhythm beginning. Sirius at Grimmauld Place, sending letters daily and appearing at Privet Drive 3 or 4 times a week with a slightly overwhelmed energy that was visibly getting more contained as time passed. He'd started eating properly and sleeping in an actual bed and the effect on his face was noticeable, the gauntness filling in, the edges softening, the underlying structure of who he was becoming more apparent. He laughed more. He and Harry had discovered, over a series of long afternoons in the back garden, that they could talk about almost anything, about James, about the Marauders, about magic, about Quidditch, which Sirius described with the evangelical enthusiasm of someone introducing a religion they believe in completely. Lupin came twice a week. He'd taken it upon himself to provide Harry with something resembling structured magical education, which meant afternoons at the kitchen table with books and practice and questions that Lupin answered with genuine pleasure and redirected into further questions because that was how Lupin thought, spirally, always turning the answer back into a new angle of the question. Harry loved it. He absorbed everything and pushed for more, and Lupin, who had been teaching in various informal capacities for years, found in Harry a student who made the whole enterprise feel like the thing it was supposed to be. Petunia sat in on every lesson. She didn't participate, exactly, she wasn't a witch and wasn't trying to be, but she listened with complete attention and asked precise clarifying questions at the end of sessions and took notes. Within 2 weeks she knew more about magical theory than most Muggleborns arrived at Hogwarts knowing. When Lupin pointed this out she said, "Knowledge has never harmed anyone," and wrote something else down. Dudley had started asking to sit in too. This had surprised everyone, including Dudley, who seemed slightly uncertain about whether this was allowed. The first time he'd appeared in the kitchen doorway during a lesson and stood there for 5 minutes before anyone addressed it was Petunia, who simply said, "Sit down if you're going to." He sat down. He didn't understand most of what Lupin was explaining, but he watched Harry practice with the focused attention he'd been giving Harry in general lately, the one that had started with the pencils and grown steadily, and occasionally asked questions that were more astute than they appeared. Vernon had reached a kind of equilibrium that looked, from the outside, like acceptance but was probably closer to pragmatic surrender. He did not engage with magical discussions. He did not ask about the hearing or its outcomes. He came home from work and read his paper and watched his programs and occasionally looked at the general domestic situation around him, Sirius at the kitchen table, Lupin in the sitting room, Petunia's list on the counter, Harry at the desk with a book that definitely hadn't been published by any muggle press, with the expression of a man who has decided that he lives here and therefore whatever happens here is technically his life, whether he can fully account for it or not. Harry didn't push him. Vernon was not going to become someone interesting. That was fine. Not everyone needed to be interesting. Some people just needed to not be actively in the way. The parents' box sat on Harry's desk. He'd opened it the evening after the hearing, alone, with the particular care you bring to things that have been waiting a long time. It had contained exactly what Ragnarok had listed, the letters, the personal items, the recorded memory, and Harry had gone through them over several evenings, slowly, not rushing, giving each thing the time it deserved. The memory had been the last thing. He'd saved it because he knew it would be enormous and he wanted to be ready. It was his parents at 6 weeks into his existence, sitting together in what must have been the living room at Godric's Hollow, both of them looking at the small thing in the blanket between them with the specific expression of people who cannot believe what they've made and are already completely sure about it. James was speaking, laughing about something, his face entirely open, and Lily was saying something back, and she was laughing too, and they were so completely present in the moment that watching it felt like standing outside a lit window on a cold night, the warmth coming through the glass. Harry had watched it twice. The second time he'd let himself simply be in it, not managing the feeling, not containing it, just present with it, and when it finished he'd sat in the quiet of his room and breathed and let the grief and the love be exactly as large as they were. Then he'd put the box carefully on the shelf above the desk, where he could see it, and gone down to dinner. He didn't hide what he felt. He didn't perform it either. He carried it the way you carry things that are large and true, openly, without pretense, as part of the weight of being alive. The Pettigrew situation resolved itself in the 4th week. The ministry action order that Ragnarok had requested came through 10 days after the hearing, and a team of Aurors went to the borough on a Tuesday morning with a containment warrant and a goblin registrar to confirm the identification. Harry heard about it through Sirius, who heard about it through a contact at the ministry, who told him that Peter Pettigrew had been found, confirmed, and taken into custody in his animagus form before he could get more than 6 inches toward the kitchen door. He'd been living as Scabbers the Weasley family's rat for 9 years. He had, confirming everything, a missing finger on his right hand. The Weasley family had been informed, which Sirius said had apparently gone extremely badly for everyone in the immediate vicinity because Ron Weasley, 7 years old, Harry's theoretical future school friend according to Lily's notes, had apparently had an enormous screaming meltdown about his pet being a criminal, which was, as Sirius put it in the letter, deeply relatable. Honestly, I'd have the same reaction. Pettigrew in human form was worse than Pettigrew as a rat in every measurable way, according to the ministry reports that Ragnarok obtained and forwarded. He'd attempted to escape twice. He'd sobbed through his initial questioning. He'd made 3 separate attempts to implicate Sirius in the original betrayal that fell apart immediately against the documentary evidence. He was, in short, exactly what 11 years of hiding as a pet had made him, someone whose courage had long since curdled into pure self-preservation and who had no architecture left for anything else. His testimony confirmed everything. The real secret keeper. The street. The finger. All of it. He gave it partly from fear and partly because there was nothing left to give from. Sirius's exoneration, already official from the hearing, was now supported by a full confession. The ministry issued a public statement. It was in the Daily Prophet on a Thursday morning and Sirius appeared at Privet Drive that afternoon with the paper folded under his arm and the expression of someone who has been waiting for something to feel real for 11 years and is not entirely sure yet if this is it. He sat at the kitchen table. Petunia made tea. Harry read the article, which was thorough and slightly sensationalist and used the phrase dark chapter in Ministry history twice, and then slid it back across the table to Sirius. "How do you feel?" Harry asked. Sirius looked at the paper. "Like I've been waiting so long for something that I don't know what to do with it now that it's here." He turned the paper over so the headline was face down. "Good. Strange. Both." "That makes sense," Harry said. "Your mother would have had opinions about this article," Sirius said. "She would have written a letter to the editor pointing out the factual inaccuracies and the passive voice they used when describing the Ministry's role." His voice was fond and sad and amused, all three at once. "I can write that letter," Harry said. Sirius looked at him. Laughed, his real laugh, the one that had been coming back piece by piece over the past weeks, fully this time, rolling out of him with the quality of something finding its way back to its original shape. "You absolutely would," he said. "James would have loved you so much. He would have taught me to write the letter and then refused to send it himself," Harry said, from what he knew of his father's character, and then sent it anyway under a pseudonym. "That is accurate," Sirius said, and laughed again, and this time it didn't have any edge of effort in it at all. Diagon Alley in August had a different quality than it had in July. Busier, more purposeful, Hogwarts letters had gone out the week before, and the alley was full of families with their lists, doing the rounds of shops in the particular combination of excitement and logistical stress that back-to-school shopping produced in any world, magical or otherwise. Harry wasn't going to Hogwarts for 4 more years. But he was here anyway, with Sirius on one side and Petunia on the other, because Sirius had said he needed new robes and Petunia had said Harry needed proper books and Harry had said he wanted to go and that had been sufficient. They moved through the alley with the particular configuration of 3 people who move at different paces for different reasons, Sirius stopping to look at everything with the slightly overwhelmed attention of someone relearning a landscape, Petunia moving with her list and her purpose, Harry somewhere between them, taking it all in at his own pace and in his own way. He was getting looks. He'd been getting looks since July, the same whispers, the same pointed attention, the same press of the crowd slightly altering its flow around him like water around a stone. It had annoyed him for about a day and then stopped annoying him when he'd realized that the looks were about his scar and his parents' history and were not, fundamentally, about him at all. They were about a story people had been telling themselves for 7 years, and he was not required to be that story's main character the way they wanted him to be. He walked through the attention as he walked through everything, present, unbothered, entirely himself. Near the Quidditch supply shop a boy about his age was standing with a tall red-haired woman, holding a list and looking in the window with an expression of intense desire. He had red hair and a smudge of something on his nose and the general aspect of someone who had been talked out of something and was still conducting the argument internally. Harry looked at him for a moment and thought about Lily's notes. A likely future school friend. He thought about the rat and the meltdown and the deeply relatable response. He went over. "Ron Weasley," he said. The boy turned around with the slightly defensive expression of someone who has had a hard few weeks and is not ready for more. He looked at Harry. His eyes went to the scar, because they always did, and then he did something that the adults in Diagon Alley consistently failed to do, which was look back up from the scar to Harry's actual face. "Yeah," he said. "You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "I'm sorry about your rat." Ron stared at him. The red-haired woman, his mother, clearly, with the same coloring and a comprehensive sort of warmth, made a sound of surprise. "He was a criminal," Ron said, with the wounded outrage of someone who has had 3 weeks to process this and is still actively processing it. "He was a criminal and I carried him around in my pocket." "I know," Harry said. "That's a terrible thing to find out and I'm sorry it happened." Ron looked at him. The hostility in his expression, which had been building from surprise, did something it hadn't been planning to do. It paused. Reconsidered. "Sirius Black is your godfather," he said. "Yes. And the rat was the reason he was in Azkaban." Yes. Ron absorbed this. That's a lot. Yes, Harry agreed. It really is. Ron looked at the shop window. Then at Harry. Do you know about Quidditch? I'm learning, Harry said. Sirius is teaching me. He played for Gryffindor at Hogwarts, Sirius said, from behind Harry, with the tone of someone making sure this was noted. Ron's face entirely transformed. What position? Beater, Sirius said. I want to be a keeper, Ron said, with the immediacy of someone who has had this decided for years. My brothers all played, Bill didn't, but Charlie was a seeker and Percy doesn't count, and Fred and George are going to be beaters probably. He stopped. You have a lot of brothers, Petunia observed, beside Harry. 6, Ron said. Well, 5, and then Ginny who's a sister. He turned to his mother. Mom, can Harry, we're finishing the shopping, his mother said, but she was looking at Harry with an expression that was assessing and warm simultaneously and which Harry recognized as the expression of someone deciding whether something is safe, in the way mothers decide this, not safely dangerous but safely good, the kind of safe that meant she was close to yes. It's very nice to meet you, Harry. She held out her hand. Molly Weasley. Harry shook it. Harry Potter. Thank you for letting me talk to Ron. Molly Weasley blinked. Then she smiled, and it was the full version of the warmth, directed at Harry specifically and completely. Of course, dear. She looked at Petunia, the automatic recognition of two women managing complicated domestic situations in a busy public space. I don't think we've met, Molly Weasley. Petunia Dursley, Petunia said, and shook hands with the brisk correctness she gave everything. Harry's guardian. Oh, I know who you are, Molly Weasley said. What you did at the hearing, the whole community is talking about it. She paused. My husband works at the ministry. He said it was extraordinary. I read the contract, Petunia said. The rest followed naturally. Molly Weasley looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recognizing a quality they respect. We have 6 children, she said. If you've read that contract in full in one night you are considerably tougher than most people I've met. I am considerably tougher than most people you've met, Petunia said, with the complete absence of boastfulness that made it simply a statement of fact, and Molly Weasley laughed, and it was a real one. Harry looked at Ron. Ron was looking at Sirius with the expression of someone in the presence of a Quidditch player and trying not to be obvious about it. Can I write to you? Harry said. When school starts, not this year, obviously. But. Yeah, Ron said. He seemed slightly surprised to have been asked, which Harry noted. Yeah, obviously. You can use our owl. Errol's rubbish but he gets there eventually. He paused. Sorry about the thing. The Pettigrew thing. It's not your fault, I mean I know it's not, but it was still, I know, Harry said. I think some things are just awful and they're allowed to be awful. They don't have to be anyone's fault to be awful. Ron looked at him with the slightly startled expression Harry was getting used to producing in people. Right, he said. Then, Sirius Black, to Sirius, over Harry's shoulder, did you actually beat a Slytherin beater in the 1972 Cup so hard his broom did a full 360? Twice, Sirius said, with complete dignity. His broom. Not him. I want to be clear on that. Harry left them to it and turned back to the alley. He found the bookshop on his own. Flourish and Blots was busy in the way bookshops are when they're the only place to get what you need, full of people moving through with purpose, but also the specific subpopulation of every bookshop who are not there for purpose but for browsing, who drift through the shelves with the loose intentionality of people being pulled by things they haven't decided they want yet. Harry was in the second category today. He'd read most of what Lupin had brought him and had a specific list of 3 things he wanted, but he allowed himself to drift through the shelves before finding them because a bookshop that contained this much was a thing to be moved through slowly. Advanced Transfiguration Theory. A History of Magical Law in Britain. And something he'd found referenced in one of his father's books that he'd been trying to locate since, a treatise on animagus transformation written in the 18th century by someone who had apparently thought about it more carefully than anyone before or since. He found the first two without difficulty. The third took him to the back of the shop and then up a narrow staircase to a smaller upper floor where the older and more specialist texts lived, in the particular companionable disorder of books that have been waiting for the right reader. It was on the third shelf from the top. He had to levitate himself 3 inches to reach it, which he did without thinking about it, he registered this with the specific pleasure of something becoming natural, exactly what was supposed to happen. He was sitting on the floor of the upper level with the treatise open in his lap when he heard footsteps on the narrow staircase and looked up. The man who emerged from the stairwell was in his mid-20s, lean and precise in his movements, with dark eyes and an expression of someone accustomed to privacy who had not expected to find someone else in it. He stopped when he saw Harry, took in the levitation, the book, the lack of visible wand, and made no particular reaction to any of it. "Good section," the man said, looking at the shelves. "The animagus treatise," Harry said, holding it up slightly. "Do you know it?" The man's eyes sharpened, not unfriendly, just the sharpening of genuine interest. Gregor Stein. 1748, most people don't find it. He moved to the shelf beside Harry and examined the spines with the ease of someone who visits often. "You're going to find Chapter 7 the most useful. And most frustrating." "Why frustrating?" "He spends 40 pages on the theoretical basis for voluntary transformation and then refuses to explain the practical application because," a slight dry edge entered his voice, "he believed the practical should only be learned in person from a qualified instructor, which meant he took the knowledge with him when he died." "So Chapter 7 is the argument without the conclusion," Harry said. "Essentially. But the argument itself is extraordinary." He pulled a different book from the shelf and looked at the cover. "You're reading theory at 7. "The seal on my core broke 3 weeks ago," Harry said. "I've been making up for lost time." The man turned slightly. Looked at him properly for the first time, which meant the scar, which meant recognition, which went through his expression and was then, unusually, simply, set aside. Not with the reverential weight most people gave it. Just noted and put down. "Draco Malfoy," the man said. Not the Draco Malfoy of Harry's future year, of course, this was that Draco's father's generation, or close to it. This was a name Harry knew from the Grimoire, from Lily's careful notes on families and their alignments, and the associations were complicated enough that he held them carefully. "Harry Potter," Harry said. "Obviously. Obviously." A pause. "That's a good book. Stain's worth the frustration." He put the other book back. "Gregor Stein and Elias Mortlake, if you want the full picture." Mortlake wrote the counterargument 20 years later and they're better together than either is alone. "Is Mortlake in this section?" The man scanned the shelves. Reached up without ceremony, he was tall enough not to need levitation, and produced a thin brown volume. He held it out. Harry took it. Looked at the spine. "On willing the form, a counterpoint to Stain's theory of animagus intent. E. Mortlake, 1771. "Thank you," Harry said. The man nodded once, briefly, and turned back to the shelves with the manner of someone who had made the exchange he intended to make and was done with it. Not unfriendly, just contained, and genuinely interested in the books rather than in the social performance around them. Harry looked at the 2 volumes in his hands and thought about what Lily had written about the Malfoy family, complicit in a system that requires complicity to function, but not without the capacity for individual judgment. Lucius Malfoy knows the difference between right and wrong. He has simply chosen, consistently, not to let that knowledge inconvenience him. Whether his son inherits the choice or the capacity remains to be seen. Harry filed this away and went back down to the main floor. He found Petunia near the front of the shop, methodically working through a section on magical household management that she had apparently identified as relevant to Sirius's situation at Grimmauld Place. She had 4 books stacked against her arm. "Those aren't on any list," Harry said. "I made a new list," she said. "Grimmauld Place has been unoccupied for 12 years. The magical household management issues alone." She stopped. Looked at his books. "What did you find?" He showed her. She looked at them with the same complete attention she gave everything and then said, "The Mortlake, I'd read that second. The argument needs the established position first or the counterpoint doesn't land properly." Harry looked at her. "How do you know about Mortlake?" "I've been reading," she said, which was the most Petunia Dursley sentence possible. She turned back to the shelf she'd been examining. Harry stood beside her for a moment and looked at the row of books she was working through, all practical, all applied, all aimed at solving specific problems, and thought about the night he'd woken at 2 in the morning and come downstairs to find her reading the grimoire by the kitchen light. About the list that had now filled several pages and been completed, item by item, without panic and without drama. About the Guardian's seal she still wore on its chain. "Petunia," he said. "Thank you," he said. "Not for any specific thing. For all of it." She took a book from the shelf, considered it, put it back. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "I did what needed to be done." "I know," Harry said. "I'm thanking you anyway." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the slightly different voice she only used when saying things she'd decided to say properly, "Your mother said, in the grimoire, she said she hoped that if I found the contract I would find, in the process of it, what I'd been trying not to look at for 15 years. She turned a page without reading it. She was right. I was. And I'm glad I found it. I'm glad I read it." A pause. "I am going to be doing better by you than I've done. Not dramatically. Just, better." "I know," Harry said. "You already are." She put the book under her arm with the others, and that was that, and they moved toward the front of the shop to find Sirius. That evening, Harry wrote a letter. He'd been thinking about it for a week and he'd decided that thinking about it any longer was just avoidance, so he sat at his desk with a piece of parchment and his best quill, a real one now, from the stationer's in Diagon Alley, not a muggle pen, and wrote it. "Dear Professor Dumbledore, I said I'd write when I was ready. I think I'm ready, or close enough that waiting longer is just habit. I want to be clear about what I'm willing to do and what I'm not. I'm willing to have a conversation. I'm willing to hear things you think I need to know. I'm not willing to be managed, arranged, or planned around. If you want to speak with me it has to be as someone who has information I might find useful, not as someone who has a strategy I'm part of. I've read my mother's notes thoroughly. I understand the prophecy and I understand your position on it. I don't disagree that Voldemort is dangerous or that he'll return. I disagree that the appropriate response to that is to keep me uninformed and controlled until I'm needed. I'd rather understand what I'm facing and make my own decisions about it. When you're willing to operate on those terms, I'm willing to talk." Harry Potter. He read it over once. It was direct without being hostile. It left the door open without leaving it unguarded. He thought his mother would have found it reasonable. He thought she might have said the last paragraph was slightly formal and he agreed but decided to keep it anyway because formal was all right here. He folded it and addressed it and would post it tomorrow. Then he pulled a blank piece of parchment toward him and sat with it for a moment, thinking about what he wanted to say. He hadn't planned this one. It had arrived while he was walking back through Diagon Alley in the afternoon, Sirius on one side talking about some memory of James and a particularly unfortunate interaction with a transfiguration exam, and it had settled in his chest with the quiet certainty of something that needed doing. He began to write. "Dear Mum, I know you can't read this. I know the grimoire is sealed and you're not anywhere that letters get to. But I want to write it anyway because I think you'd have wanted to know how it went, and writing it is how I tell you. It went exactly as you planned. Every piece of it. The contract, the Gringotts meeting, the hearing. Petunia was extraordinary. I know you knew she would be. You built the whole thing around knowing she would be, and you were completely right. She read the entire contract in one night and had a list ready by morning, and she was terrifying at the tribunal in the best possible way. She looked at Crouch like he was a planning committee she'd already decided to outlast. Sirius is free. He's at Grimmauld Place, which sounds like a building that needs a great deal of work, and he laughs more every week, and he's teaching me about Quidditch, and he tells me things about Dad that are so specific and real that I feel like I'm being introduced to someone, slowly, one detail at a time. I like it. I know you'd want me to know him that way. Lupin comes twice a week. He teaches me things and lets me ask everything and never makes me feel like the questions are too much. I understand why you trusted him. I went to Diagon Alley today. I walked the whole length of it twice, and I looked at everything, and nobody managed me or arranged me or decided in advance what I should think of it. I decided on my own. I thought it was brilliant. I watched your memory. The one from when I was 6 weeks old. You and Dad in the living room. I watched it twice, and I let it be as big as it was, and it was enormous, and I'm all right. I know you're not reading this. But I think you're in the magic, somehow. Not literally. But you're in the way the contract worked and the way the grimoire reads and the way I already knew things I hadn't been taught yet, like you left pieces of yourself in the parts of me that were forming when you were reading to me and talking to me and thinking about who I was going to be. I feel you in those pieces. I'm going to be all right. I'm going to do this right. Not because of the prophecy, despite it, actually, because I refuse to be only about the prophecy. Because you said I was not a weapon and not a symbol and not a sacrifice, and I believe you. I'm going to be a person who also happens to deal with a prophecy, not a prophecy that happens to be a person. I think you'd like that distinction. I love you. Harry. He sat with the letter for a moment after he finished it. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the box with her letters, with his father's letters, with Sirius's letter, with all the things that were his and only his and had been waiting for him to come and claim them. He put the box back on the shelf where he could see it. Outside, Privet Drive was doing its evening performance, sprinklers and dinner smells and the sound of televisions through open windows. The light was the specific gold of late summer, long and warm, the kind that makes everything it touches look like it's been important for a very long time. Downstairs he could hear Petunia in the kitchen and Sirius's voice, which meant Sirius had stayed for dinner, and Lupin was probably staying too because he usually did when Sirius was here, and there would be too many people at the table and not enough room for everyone, and it would be loud in the way the house had never been loud before, not in this way, not with this specific quality of people who had chosen to be there. Harry got up and went to the window and looked out at the garden, the rose bushes and the straight-line lawn and the back fence and beyond at the ordinary suburban world going about its ordinary evening, and felt, simply, the specific plainness of being somewhere you've decided to be. He would go to Hogwarts at 11. He would walk through those doors under his own power and with his own intention, and he would learn everything available to learn, and he would make friends and probably enemies, and he would discover things about himself that he couldn't currently anticipate. He would face whatever was coming with the fullness of what he was, not the managed minimum of what someone else had decided was safe. Voldemort was out there, somewhere barely alive, and he would return, because things that are barely alive tend to want to be more alive, and there was a prophecy, and Harry was in it. He knew. He was not afraid. He was 7 years old and he had his mother in his chest and his godfather downstairs and his father in every piece of magic he'd ever done, and when the time came he would face it as himself, completely, without apology, without being made smaller first. The stairs creaked as someone came up. A knock at the door. "Dinner," Sirius said. "Lupin burned something, allegedly by accident, which Petunia is not accepting, and there's a thing happening with the gravy that I genuinely don't understand. I think you should come down." "I'm coming," Harry said. "Good. Also Petunia wants to know if you've sent the letter to Dumbledore yet." "Tomorrow morning," Harry said. She said you'd say that and that tomorrow morning is acceptable. A pause, through the door. She also said if you haven't sent it by 9 she's sending it herself with a second paragraph about punctuality. That second paragraph would be more effective than mine anyway, Harry said. A beat of Sirius's real laugh, easy, full, the version that had nothing holding it back. Yeah. She absolutely would. Another pause, softer. You all right? Yes, Harry said. Genuinely. Good. The stair creaked again as Sirius headed back down. Come on then. Before the gravy situation becomes a crisis. Harry took one more look at the box on the shelf. His mother's letters. His father's handwriting. Sirius's words from 11 years ago in a Gringotts vault, trusting a 1-year-old to grow up and come and collect them. Be brilliant. I know you are. He turned from the window. Went down to dinner. The kitchen was too full and too loud and the gravy was absolutely a crisis and Petunia was explaining the precise nature of its failure to Lupin with the focused intensity of someone who cares about gravy as a matter of principle, and Sirius was laughing at both of them, and Dudley was trying to understand why wizards couldn't just fix burnt things with magic, and Vernon was in the corner reading his paper with the practiced invisibility of a man who has reached an accommodation with his circumstances. Harry sat down at the table, in the middle of all of it, and nobody had arranged him or managed him or decided in advance what he should be, and the dinner was slightly burnt and completely real, and every single person at this table had chosen, in their own way, to be here, and that was the whole of it. That was exactly and entirely enough. Later, after Lupin and Sirius had gone and Dudley had gone to bed and Vernon had retreated, Petunia sat at the kitchen table with the last cup of tea of the day and the notepad that now had everything crossed off, every line, every article, every task, completed. She opened it to a clean page. She thought about Lily at 9, making butterflies out of leaves in the back garden, laughing at the look on Petunia's face. She thought about Lily at 17, going back to school with her robes folded perfectly in her trunk and her wand in its case, turning at the door to wave. She thought about letters, irregular and careful, over years that were never quite long enough for everything they needed to say. She thought about a doorstep in November and a small cold weight that shouldn't have been there and her own terror and her own failure to ask the right questions and the 12 subsequent years of trying to manage that failure into something she could live inside. She took the pen. Dear Lily, she wrote, and then she sat with the page for a long time. He's all right, she wrote finally. He's more than all right. He's extraordinary, and I know you knew he would be, but I want you to know I can see it. Not the prophecy kind. Not the famous kind. The actual kind. The way he thinks and the way he holds himself and the way he asks questions that go right to the middle of things. He has your exactness. He has James's nerve. He has something that's entirely his own that I couldn't have predicted. He laughed today. Full, real, I heard it from the kitchen and I didn't need to see his face to know it was real. It sounded like you. The pitch of it. I'm sorry I was small about it for so long. I'm sorry I let the fear turn into all those years of distance. I was afraid of what you were and I dressed it up as something more reasonable and I knew I was doing it and I did it anyway, and there is nothing I can say about that except that I knew you loved me through all of it, I always knew, and I was too frightened and proud to let you see that I knew. I found the grimoire. You knew I would eventually. You know me better than I've ever been comfortable with. I'm going to take care of him, Lily. Properly. The way you built it so he could be taken care of. Not perfectly, I'm not a perfect person and I won't pretend to be one for the sake of a letter I can't send. But completely. Fully. With everything I have. You were the most remarkable person I ever knew. I should have said that when you could hear me. I love you. Toonie. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, in 3 neat folds, and put it in the back of the notepad, between 2 blank pages, where it would stay, read by no one and addressed to someone who couldn't read it and true in every word. She capped her pen. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. Privet Drive was quiet in its ordinary way. But it was a different quiet than it had been a month ago. The same walls, the same furniture, the same street visible through the same window. But the quality of what was inside them was not the same, and the difference was not dramatic or finished or resolved into something neat. It was alive. It was ongoing. It was exactly as uncertain and real as things are when they've stopped being managed and started being lived. Petunia Dursley turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and upstairs her nephew slept in a room of his own with his parents' letters on the shelf and his mother's magic in his chest, and in a house in London a man who had spent 11 years in a cell was learning, slowly, how to sleep without dreaming of grey water, and in a small cottage in Wales another man was writing notes for next week's lesson, and somewhere in the magical world a prophecy waited with the patience of all inevitable things for the person it described to grow old enough to meet it on his own terms. He would. He was Harry Potter, and he was nobody's weapon, and he was nobody's symbol, and he was nobody's sacrifice. He was just Harry. And that was more than enough to change everything.